Good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30 and this inquiry is resumed. I try and wait to start until that recording in progress. I never get it right. This inquiry is into an appeal by Basden Estates Limited under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 against the failure of Basden Borough Council to determine a planning application, and the description of that development is a hybrid application seeking detailed planning permission for plot 1 and outline planning permission for plot 2. And as we have concentrated on in the inquiry, that plot 1 involves two taller buildings on a podium. Plot 2 is outline planning permission for 2 taller buildings on a podium, and there is a detailed description of development that is in the documentation associated with the appeal. Could I just check, please, do we have any members of the public with us here today who wish to address the inquiry? Thank you. Any housekeeping matters that we need to pick up on?
Ma'am, yes, if you just allow me to reflect on the business of the day very shortly, that would be helpful in terms of organising my team. We are, as usual, spread across a variety of locations. Ma'am, am I right in recording that the current version of the programme indicates that we will deal with the Heritage Roundtable discussion first, and then come on to what you described as the Section 106 Roundtable discussion initial after that?
Yeah.
I just, in relation to that second point, you'll be aware that from the beginning, from the outset of the inquiry, I've been anxious to get the ball rolling, as it were, on the 106 because of your early indication that you wanted, if at all possible, an executed obligation before the close of the inquiry next week. And on the day we opened, there was still an outstanding and unresolved issue in relation to one of the county obligations. And I was very keen that we would, as it were, flush that out, understand what the parties' positions were, and then we could take appropriate action if necessary to convert into a unilateral, and there would be time to deal with that, which there might not be had we left all the discussion of the planning obligation to the last day of the inquiry. Now, as I reported to you in a very preliminary way yesterday, discussions have moved forward satisfactorily, and we are now, I think, all confident that there will be a single bilateral obligation which binds the appellant in respect of obligations to both the borough and the county. There will be no need to switch to unilateral, and I don't expect there will be any disagreement as to the substance of any of the obligations. So my early anxieties, although they might have been well-founded, have effectively been put to one side. And I just wanted to alert you to that. In terms of the initial session, there's not as much on the agenda for that as there might have been had we still had some substantive disagreement between the parties. So I think really we can still do that today, and we're in a position to do that. But I just wanted to alert you to the fact that might be a shorter session, and indeed, if there are any points that you want to draw to our attention, any uncertainties or unhappiness that you have in relation to the draft obligation we sent on Monday, this would be a convenient time to hear about those, and we'll obviously try and respond in time for the full planning conditions and obligation session that's programmed in for next Wednesday, I believe. Well, I just wanted to say that the things have moved forward in a satisfactory and helpful way, so there's less of a concern on my part in relation to what we might need to deal with in that initial session.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Hill. Could I ask who is attending this afternoon's or later this morning's session?
Well, ma'am, I will be, and my instructing solicitor will be, and we will be able to draw upon Ms. Jones as well, who is my planning witness in relation to the substance of some of those obligations. But I say we don't want to take more time over it than we need to, and it's really if you have any particular concerns or queries that you want to air before we come to the second more detailed analysis of the conditions and obligations next week.
So for the section 106 round table, you are planning to have the relevant people there at the one next week?
We can do, yes.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to say anything on that?
Madam, so far as the council is concerned, we're content to address any issues on the 106 as you think is appropriate. I've got Miss Mackay with me today at the council offices, and Miss Mackay will be available next week if there are round table 106 matters to be discussed next week. So shortly we are ready to go.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's see how we get on later on this morning, and that will indicate what we need to pick up on later on in the week.
I should also just to conclude on that, ma'am, if I might, that the agreement reached yesterday in discussions is obviously being converted now into an updated draft. Okay. That isn't yet complete, but it will be complete, and as soon as it is, it will be sent to you. And
that will amend section 7 that you as highlighted in the version.
It deals with the early years facility, ma'am.
Yeah, I understand. Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Mum. Just to say that we don't have any substantive comments on the Section 106 agreement, so we don't intend to take an active role in that roundtable discussion. And I was planning on excusing my team. I will obviously be here just in case there are other matters arising, and out of courtesy, really, more than anything else. But we don't intend to take an active part.
No, that's completely understood. Thank you for that. I see that the council, you've slightly rearranged your, and Mr. Edwards, you've rearranged your,
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Is it, sorry, Mr. Edwards.
I talked across you, madam, do carry on, I'm so sorry.
No, I was just wondering, Mr. Edwards, if it's possible for the round table for Mr. Murphy, I see Mr. Murphy's beside you there, is it possible for him to come up to the camera at all?
Yes, we can adjust things, madam, so it's closer.
Well, would you mind? I always find, because often we're dealing with this situation, and when you're talking to witness, it's very difficult when you've got one who's a pinprick on the horizon and another one who's right in front of you. I find it much easier if I've got the witnesses with equal view, if you know what I mean. Now, what I would like for the round table, please can advocates keep their cameras on, because what I will do is at appropriate times, I'll look and I will give you the opportunity if there are things that you wish to raise. Of course, it's not a formal cross-examination, but if there are matters that you want to raise, I certainly want to give you the opportunity to do that. So if you just make that known to me, I will try and bring you in at appropriate times, or give you that opportunity. Of course, not to give evidence, as you know, but to obviously to ask any questions that you feel that you need to.
Madam, can I just check? We've adjusted the camera. Is that better?
Yes, it is better. I mean, please could the other witnesses turn their cameras on? Ms. Markham and Mr. Hancock. Yeah. Can you do any better than that?
Well, what I might do, madam, if you just give us a moment, I might actually go off this sort of common camera, as it were, and just go onto the camera on my computer, and then I'll just leave Mr. Hancock, Mr. Hancock and Mr. Murphy to sort of take centre stage, as it were. So if you could just give us a moment just to readjust.
Okay, it's a small adjustment, but it just makes it easier for me.
Can I just say, in respect of our team, that Ms. Markham and Mr. McCower are scattered across London, and we're all in separate places, and I hope you'll allow for anything that is required in terms of internal communications on that front.
Of course. Oh, that's much better. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That's much better. we'll wait for Mr. Edwards to pop up somewhere. Could pop up anywhere, couldn't he? Does everybody have a copy of my agenda? I sent out an agenda. Yes?
Yes.
I see nods around. I keep on referring to around the table, but this is actually a table, isn't it? It's a round table discussion, so we can use that term. We'll just wait for Mr. Edwards.
And we'll wait for Mr. Edwards, of course, but when he does appear, there was one point I wanted to raise in relation to the heading, your heading 8 on the agenda. Obviously, I won't do so until Mr. Edwards is here, but I just had as to how that's framed, I was just going to raise that with you if you'll allow me.
Mr. Edwards?
Yes, madam. I'm here.
Sorry, could you just try your, Mr. Edwards, could you try your audio again?
Yes, madam.
Yes, that's a bit problematic.
Is that better?
Much better.
Good. We sorted it out. Thank you. Sorry.
That often happens if you're. Are you in the same room? Yeah, that can happen. Okay. Yeah, that's much better for me, Mr. Edwards. Thank you. You're on mute at the moment, or do you have to be on mute?
Yeah, I can. Hopefully, you can hear me, madam. I'm speaking into the main microphone in the room.
Oh, okay. Yes, absolutely. Mr. Hill, you wanted to raise a point.
Ma'am, yes, if you'll allow me, it was just in relation to your item 8 on the agenda and just how we frame that. That is set out at the moment as proposed mitigation. And I just wondered whether we could convert that to perhaps a slightly more neutral expression and say proposed design response to Brook House. And I fully understand what you want to explore under that head, but if we could call it proposed design response to Brook House, then I think that would be slightly more open-ended.
I don't have any objection to that. Does anybody else?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Okay, the documents that that we'll be referring to are all the proofs. There are no shocks here. All the proofs, the Heritage Statement of Common Ground, the HTVIA, the listing description. Sorry, is everyone okay?
Sorry, ma'am. I was just talking to Mr. Edwards. A document I'm missing. I wasn't on mute.
Okay. Okay, then. So the purpose of this session, we've actually, because these issues are interrelated, we have actually explored a lot of this ground during evidence that I've heard already. So, and that's why I've indicated that this session is likely to be shorter than I had initially anticipated, but the purpose of this session is for me to examine the evidence in relation to heritage assets that may be affected by the appeal proposal, so that I can be assured that in coming to my conclusions on these matters, I discharge my statutory duty. In this regard, section 661 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. In relation to the appeal proposal, the council alleges harm to the setting of Brook House, that's grade 2 listed building. It says that it's contrary to policies HE1 and HE3 of the borough's local plan. And the aim of those policies generally is to protect and conserve the borough's heritage. Okay. So at the end of this discussion, I want to be very clear on the respective parties' positions. One, the suggested harm to the significance of the heritage asset or benefit. I know that there's a difference between the parties on that. Now, if one were to identify harm, and indeed the council does, what heritage benefits should be taken into account in assessing where on the scale of heritage harm that would land us. Now, there may be a very simple answer to that, but in light of the difference between the parties on this matter, I will be looking at the heritage balance, that's the internal heritage balance in light of Bram's Hill, to be dealt with by your respective planning witnesses as part of the planning evidence. So I will, in this session, we will know what the extent of harm is, what the proposed suggested heritage benefits are, and then I'll be looking for the advocates to take me through that as part of the planning evidence and overall planning balance. Okay, is that clear?
Ma'am, it is in relation to the paragraph 202 exercise, which we completely understand, and we fully expect Ms. Jones to deal with the weighing of any, if it's found by yourself that there is some harm on the scale in relation to less than substantial harm, how one then weighs in the balance, the benefits, the broad benefits associated with the scheme. What I just wanted to be clear about was the internal heritage balance, which is a slightly separate and narrower exercise. And I must say, I had thought that the striking of the balance of any heritage harm against any heritage gain would be something you'd want this team of witnesses to address.
Yes.
And I'm just in relation to Bram's Hill, which you helpfully mentioned, we fully accept that there's no prescriptive way as to how this is dealt with, and that it's a matter for the decision maker as to how they approach this issue. We had particularly in mind, I think it's paragraph 78, just for your note, of the Bram's Hill Court of Appeal judgment, where the court says cases will vary. There might, for example, be benefits to the heritage asset itself exceeding any adverse effects to it, so that there would be no harm of the kind envisaged in paragraph 196. So there is a sort of heritage focused balancing exercise that loads onto the 196 question any harm and any gain focused on heritage only. And then one reaches a preliminary view, as it were, as to whether or not there is less than substantial harm and where that might be. And then, as there's a totally separate exercise on the paragraph 202, when one loads in all the other benefits, housing, land supply, and all those other issues. So I just wanted to be sure whether you wanted that internal heritage only focus exercise to be dealt with by these witnesses, because it would seem to me that would be perhaps the more obvious thing to do.
No, I understand that. Mr. Edwards, can I hear your perspective on that, please?
Yes. Madam, we take a slightly different approach to that put by Mr. Hill, arising from essentially the decision of the Court of Appeal in Bram's Hill. Certainly, as we see Bram's Hill, Madam, Mr. Hill is entirely right, and it's common ground, but how you approach any alleged heritage benefits or heritage benefits that you may find arise is a matter for you. But we would suggest that the approach that should be taken in a case of this nature, where there isn't any, as I understand it, mitigation being proposed to address heritage harm, is that you identify the heritage harm, if there is any, you identify where that is on the scale, you attach great weight and importance to it, and then any benefits fall to be assessed as part of the NPPF-based balancing of heritage harm versus public benefits. And that, we suggest, is entirely in accordance with the approach that the inspector took in the Bramshill case, which both the High Court and the Court of Appeal thought was appropriate. So, Madam, of course, identifying whether there are any benefits, we would say, is entirely appropriate for this session. And then it comes down
I'm sorry, Mr. Edwards, if there are any heritage benefits.
I'm sorry, I should say that. If there are any heritage benefits, is entirely a matter appropriate for consideration of this session. And if you find, contrary to the council's case, there are any benefits, then we would submit those benefits have to then be put in the balance along with any other public benefits as part of the balancing exercise to be carried out by the planning witnesses next week, as opposed to, I think, what the appellant is saying, that you carry out some sort of internal balancing exercise where there's harm, there are benefits, and the one can outweigh the other before you reach a view as to whether there is harm and to what extent there is that harm. And we say that is the correct approach in this case, supported by the Court of Appeal in Bramshill.
Yeah, and what I want, I will carry out, I will get all the evidence that I need so that I understand what the different parties' views are on that. But I would like the advocates to take me through, in whether you do it in closing or whether you do it with your planning witness, to take me through that balancing exercise as you see it. Is that clear? And does that make sense?
It certainly makes sense to me, Madam. Yes, of course, we'll deal with that next week with our planning witness.
Mr. Hill?
Yes, ma'am. Certainly, I understand you'll want to understand very clearly how we put our cases, and there is an important burden on us to ensure that those cases are clear, both in the planning evidence and in our closing submissions. I think, just listening to what Mr. Edwards said in response to your invitation, it may be that his approach is dictated to some degree by the fact that the council doesn't accept that there are any heritage gains associated with our proposals. But I think if you were to take a contrary view, then it would certainly be open to you on the Court of Appeal, paragraph 78 in Bramshill, to load those heritage gains into the internal heritage balance and take a view as to whether they were sufficient to outweigh any provisional finding of harm you might reach. And that is a separate exercise, or can be a separate exercise, to the paragraph 202 weighing, which we all agree has to be undertaken as well. So I think I will draw under heading 8 of your agenda, I'll draw your attention specifically to the positive heritage elements of our case that what I'd like you to bear in mind. They're set out by Ms. Markham at paragraph 185 in summary form of her proof, and Mr. McCower can elaborate those as well. But thank you for the opportunity to address you on those points, ma'am.
Okay. Okay then. So a few matters of procedure. I'll ask each of the parties questions. All questions should be through me, of course. I'll check at the end that each party is content that all matters have been covered, and I'll look to the advocates and I will give an opportunity to ask questions, obviously not cross-examination. Please, for the council, please, could you introduce your witness?
Yes, of course, Madam. As you've all already confirmed, it's Mr. Murphy who will give the heritage evidence for the council. Mr. Murphy is on camera and sits beside me at the council offices. You have Mr. Murphy's qualifications and experience set out in section 1 of his main proof. It's hopefully clearly set out there, and I don't need to introduce him anymore unless there's anything I can assist with.
And then on behalf of the appellant, I think we've already met Ms. Markham.
Yes, I'm not going to reintroduce Ms. Markham. I took her qualifications yesterday. And as I said, Mr. McCower will be available to deal with heading 8 as a supplementary to anything Ms. Markham might say. I don't think he'll have anything to contribute on the other items in your agenda.
Okay, thank you. And rule 6.
Mum, you've already met Mr. Hancock.
Thank you. So those are the witnesses. Now I've got a statement of common ground on these matters between the council and appellant. Now it agrees that the appeal defendant would not harm a number of heritage assets, and those are listed. So it identifies a number of heritage assets, including the Church of St. Nicholas, grade 1, and it agrees that there would be no harm to those heritage assets. So it includes a number of listed buildings, it includes a scheduled moat, and indeed it includes a number of non-heritage assets. Is that everybody's understanding? Mr. Murphy, Ms. Markham, Mr. Hancock?
Yes.
Yes, Mum.
Okay. So what it does do is it sets out that there is disagreement with regard to the heritage asset that we've been talking about at great length in this inquiry, which is Brook House, doesn't it? Now, are there any, I'm particularly looking to the council, are you suggesting that there's any other harm? I've got a statement of common ground in front of me. We've heard
no, Mum. Just Brook House. No, Mum. Sorry, just Brook House is the is the heritage asset for consideration.
So no other non-heritage assets?
No, just Brook House, Mum.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, and generally, most of you in your evidence have taken the approach in the PPG, which is to assess significance, identify setting, contribution of setting to significance, and then the impact of proposed development. Yeah, and then come up with a balance. And we've spoken about whether there's an internal balance within that heritage to weigh heritage benefits, and then land on, if you do identify harm, where that harm would be. Okay. In terms of the setting and surround setting, well, can I put this is just clarifying what we're talking about. Can I put to the council what we mean by setting? It's an easy one. It's in Annex 2. Yeah.
So the attributes of setting contribute to significance, and in my proof, I've outlined which attributes of setting contribute to the significance of Brook House.
Sorry, Mr. Murphy.
As outlined by the guidance, the setting of heritage assets, GPA free.
And I mean, this is common ground. It's not controversial, I hope. The setting is the surroundings in which an asset is experienced. Are we all agreed on that? Yes. And that's in Annex 2. In the MPPF. In this case, we don't have a view from Historic England. That's not unusual. And there are a number of Historic England good practice notes that many of you refer to. That's note 2, that's decision taking in the historic environment. 3, the setting of heritage assets, tall buildings, and statements of heritage significance, and various ones of you refer to those documents. That those are all referred to, and indeed all of you have framed your evidence in light of those. Is that all agreed between us?
Yes, that's agreed.
Okay, thank you. Okay then, so we move on then to the identification of the heritage assets likely to be affected, and helpfully you've worked together and you've pointed me towards Brook House. Does somebody want to kick off and tell me the significance, what you see the significance of that listed building to be? Now, I've actually heard quite a lot from Mr. Hancock and Ms. Markham, and indeed your teams, on that issue. Could we turn to Mr. Murphy, please, who hasn't had his chance to indicate your position on Brook House. So what is the significance of Brook House?
So thank you, Mum. The significance of Brook House I've outlined in section 5 of my proof, but I've prepared a short paragraph here I'll just read out to assist you. The significance of Brook House is partly drawn from its architectural interest, which is derived from its physical presence and bold architectural form and features, such as the striking 8-metre V-shaped pilotis, which elevate the upper floors of the building, and the distinctive projecting triangular windows. The scale and visual prominence of the listed building within its surrounding townscape and its intentional placement in the town centre provide an understanding of its conception and function as a landmark building constructed to accommodate a higher density residential population at the heart of the new town. Today, this also serves as an architectural landmark which enhances our understanding of the new town innovation and what was perceived as new ways of living at the time. I go further. Do you want me to go more into the setting now, Mum? I've got another paragraph I can... Or...
No, let's just deal with the significance of the listed building. So, Miss Markham, please. You've heard what Mr. Murphy has said. So he's spoken about the architecture, about the history of it, and what it represents within the new town.
Yes, thanks very much, Mum. I'd agree with Mr. Murphy on his definition of the architectural interest of the listed building. I'd give more emphasis to the architectural interest than I think Mr. Murphy does, and I think that's really the primary reason for listing. And I think I talked yesterday about the sort of interest in the sort of geometry of the forms. You've got this very large cuboid, which is supported on the V-shaped pilotti, and the pilotti is sort of 3 stories high, so that gives a real sort of drama and visual interest, and indeed townscape interest of the building. And the pilotti were influenced by Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation. And I think also the elevations of architectural interest as well, with the V-shaped windows, which have this sort of crystalline form in terms of appearing like a crystal, but also the whole form of the building has a crystalline form, in meaning it has a sort of clear expression. I think the building also has some historic interest.
Okay. Sorry, Miss Markham. Can I just stop you there? If we just break this down, let's just deal with architectural interest at the moment.
Okay. That's
so
fine.
You've clearly given your perspective. Could I just ask Mr. Hancock the same question in terms of architectural interest? I think there's a lot of common ground on this.
Yes, I think so. As Ms. Marcus has said, I'm with her to a very significant degree as to the. I made the point yesterday in my evidence about the fact that the building as expressed in that 1957 article is probably not a listed building. That is supposition, but it's quite pedestrian. What therefore we can derive about what is significant about Brook House is it's about the pilotis, it's about the relationship with the Sunken Square, the way that is thought through as an architectural piece. And I think it's very noticeable when you see the building that the quality of it. I was there at the weekend quite early, and the way that the windows catch the light is quite it's quite impressive. And that is an architectural gesture that lifts it above the pedestrian for the period. And I think actually it's quite noticeable that if you break it down into its architectural components, viewed from the south, for example, the southern elevation is very typical of the period, with a central sort of spine of windows that feeds onto the central corridors, and that's a sort of typical elevation of the type. But it's the way that the windows then protrude out of the side, and the way they catch the light and they move as you move around the building, which is particularly impressive. So it's the expression on those facades and the expression at the base, which really elevate this above the pedestrian and make it a significant building, in my view, architecturally.
Thank you very much. Mr. Murphy, would you like to add anything on the architecture? I just want the architectural significance of the building.
No.
Okay.
I think the architectural significance has been articulated by all parties.
Okay, and the appellant, you place more emphasis on the architectural interest of the building as opposed to other aspects of its significance.
Yes, as opposed to, I suppose, its historic interest and also its role as a landmark. And
right, sorry, Miss Markham, sorry. I want to move on to its historic interest, please, and maybe you could start there, please.
Yes, I mean, I think it is of historic interest because it was the first tall building to be constructed in Basildon, and it represented a change in approach, as we could see in the contemporary architectural press at the time.
And I don't intend turning those documents up. We went through them at some length, and I know Mr. Murphy, were you here for that discussion, Mr. Murphy? We've turned up the 3 documents time and time again.
I watched a cross-examination yesterday, so okay. that I'm aware of what was said.
Okay, thank you. Yes,
so so it's of historic interest for being the first tall building in Basildon, but it's not been the last. There's been others since, and that's something that was recognised in the Orwell appeal decision at paragraph 13. And I don't think that in itself would warrant listing. And there is also a historic association with Henry Brooke, who was an MP and the Minister of Housing, and that's sort of, again, I don't think that would warrant listing in its own right. You see a lot of public authority buildings that are named after local councillors and MPs, and that it needs to have some architectural interest to warrant listing. But those are aspects of the historic interest of the building that wouldn't warrant listing.
Okay, so it's got associations with Henry Brooke, and Basil Spence, and that there are historic connections there. Mr. Hancock, do you have anything to add to that, just dealing with the historic interest of the building?
Yes, I mean, I think I'd just to sort of refer this back to what I was saying yesterday about the New Town movement. It is part of that world, of that milieu. It's a particular typology of gesture. There's been a lot of discussion about the motivations behind that and where it sits within the wider understanding of Basildon as a new town and Basildon's wider significance as a new town, which I think feeds into the degree of historic interest you give it, in my view. But yes, I think I would broadly agree with Ms. Markham. I wouldn't want you to. I think Ms. Markham and I would both agree that the point on Henry Brooke is not something that you should give any particular note to. I mean, it's as Ms. Markham was saying, it's a fairly typical thing to sort of go, well, name after this guy. So I think from my perspective, it is about that position that it holds within the New Town movement primarily, which is significant from a historic perspective.
Mr. Murphy, do you have anything that you would like to say? I mean, there seems to be.
Yeah, I don't particularly disagree with anything that's said. The only thing I'd add is obviously those historical associations with single tall buildings as part of the New Town movement, and also we've also got the communal aspect of the building and how it's held and valued probably in the local public consciousness and so on. That just to add those two on, which would come under historical in the latest Historic England Guidance Statements of Significance.
Okay, so let's deal with its. I don't want to go over in detail its Townscape role because we went through that in detail yesterday, but there are some aspects that will contribute to its significance. Please, and particularly I want you to pick up with its relationship with obviously the fountain and the sunken square, please. Could I ask Mr. Murphy, please?
So in terms of the immediate setting, do you mean, Ma'am? Sorry, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So yes, close to in close proximity to Brooke House, one does experience the composition with the sunken square and the fountain, both of which are listed structures in their own right, and that's a deliberate composition, and one can appreciate the architectural interest of Brook House also. Furthermore, in terms of the setting, it's not just the designated heritage assets that one experiences, it's also the low-rise surroundings of Brook House, which has been mentioned in the appeal decision. If I take you to paragraph 38.
Are you taking me to Orwell?
Oh, sorry, Orwell appeal decision.
E25, okay.
Yeah, which is paragraph 38.
Yeah, we've been there. Yeah.
Nonetheless, Brook House remains preeminent because of its distinctive form and the contrast provided by much lower buildings along the main pedestrianised spine. That's a point that the inspector made there. And also, if we go to Miss Markham's evidence as well, proof of evidence at 7.34.
Yeah.
And also 7.33, Brook House is part of the same. Brook House is part of the same city block as the appeal site. The articles in the Contemporary Architectural Press indicate that numbers 29 to 33 Town Square within the site and adjacent to the listed building were completed with Brook House in 1962. Numbers 19 to 27 Town Square were completed earlier in October 1960. The rest of the site, Northgate House and the former Marks and Spencer's, were almost a decade later. Then importantly, numbers 19 to 33, and in particular the two-storey range closest to Brook House, form part of an architectural composition with Brook House as a horizontal podium structure from which Brook House springs upwards. As such, this part of the site makes a positive contribution to the appreciation of the significance of Brook House, despite its ordinary architectural quality and the issues with condition and vacancy. So I think we have the designated heritage assets with which Brook House form a composition, the appeal decision and Ms. Markham's own evidence as well in those points also highlight the townscape context of those low-rise buildings and the importance of those to the setting of Brook House also.
Okay, so we heard a lot about this in evidence previously. So it's the relationship between the horizontal elements and the verticality of Brook House.
And preeminence, Ma'am, yes. In that,
yeah, it's preeminent, yeah.
Which is mentioned by the inspector of the Orwell appeal at paragraph 38 also.
Yeah. We heard a lot about that yesterday and the day before, yes.
And the listing, of course, as well, one can't forget citation.
Okay, Ms. Markham, could I ask you the same question in terms of its townscape, the contribution of its townscape significance to the significance of the listed building?
Yes, absolutely. I think it would be helpful to refer to the list description, which, I mean, we don't necessarily need to turn this up because I've got the kind of quote written here, but if you want to have a look at it, it's in Appendix 1 of the HDBIN.
Yeah, I have it turned up.
And that sort of defines quite clearly what the townscape role of the building is, and that's the bold and subtly profiled pilotti, together with the siting of the block forward of the adjacent building line to the west and facing Sunken Square to the east, gives a significant townscape role to the building. And I completely agree with that. It's really sort of quite tightly defined in the sort of immediate setting of the building. And there's, I mean, we heard quite a lot about it yesterday, but the sort of drama of placing this very tall building on the pilotti next to a sunken landscape with a sort of row of steps going down into East Square sort of gives further emphasis to its townscape role. And also just the fact that it's set forward from the appeal site gives emphasis to it. I don't think the Townscape role relies on its height alone. And the other point I wanted to make is I don't think, although I recognise that Brook House does have a landmark role in the Townscape, I don't think that's the reason for it being listed. There are many tower blocks across the country that aren't listed, and very close to the site there's Great Oaks, which is a tall building, and that's not listed for its landmark role. And as I sort of explained earlier, I think Brook House is listed because of its architectural interest and the expression of the sort of immediate townscape that I've just described. And I agree with Mr. Hancock that another form of Brook House could have been constructed and wouldn't have been listed. And there was that illustration in the AJ in 1957, which had a very different form, and I don't think that would have been listed. So it really is to do with the architectural interest of the building rather than its landmark role. Right,
but you have referred me to one, the alignment, and to its placement in relation. So you do accept that adds to its significance.
Yeah. So it's more immediate, less to do with the height and more to the immediate setting.
I understand that. Mr. Hancock, do you have anything to add to what Miss Markham has said?
Not a great deal, Mum. Just to sort of clarify the point, really, that it is really about arrangement and about your experience of the horizontal and the vertical as far as that immediate townscape is concerned. As you will have seen on site, the experience from the square to the east is particularly dramatic because you're dropped down below the pilotis and lifted up, and that for Kenneth Brown is a very significant consideration. I think the issue with the immediate architecture surrounding it, I think, is quite a problematic one for you to consider in some ways, in terms of the fact that we're not actually talking about the qualities of those buildings, because a lot of them are extremely poor. It is really about that horizontality.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Bracknell is a very good example of a new town where all of the buildings in the town centre have essentially been replaced, but horizontality remains. So it's less about the architecture and more about the experience of that interaction of the horizontal and the vertical. And we go slightly back to the architecture, but as Ms. Markham was saying, really, it's the architectural quality of Brook House that is arresting in addition to the height. So it's that juxtaposition. It's not that there is just a tall building that is vertical and sits against it. And I think in a way, Mr. Murphy has very helpfully in his appendices included a series of historic images, which I think, and I was saying yesterday, there's a couple of sort of historic photographs in there that are sort of the money shots, really, and that's where you see that interaction in play, really. Then you can see the contribution that Brook House is making to its setting and vice versa.
Okay, could I turn to Mr. Murphy, please? Now, you heard about, I want to ask you in particular about the alignment of the building and its placement in relation to those horizontal elements. I mean, I think there's agreement between you about the horizontal and verticality. Could you just comment on that, please?
Yes, Mum, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind just one clarification from the conversation that's just happened? Because I just wanted to point out that Ms. Markham, I know you don't want to sit on the listing description, but Ms. Markham helpfully quoted part of the listing description to you, but I think it's quite important to also consider the sentence before Ms. Markham's quote, which says, Brook House was designed to introduce high density residential block into Basildon's town centre, and visually to provide a dominant vertical landmark to counterbalance the predominantly horizontal emphasis of the surrounding shops. And then Miss Markham's quote carries on after that. But I think it's important to just have that precursor to that quote.
No, absolutely. I will come back to that. Could I just ask you about the alignment and the placement, please?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of some of my views and the historic views as well, with the alignment and placement of Brook House, what one experiences in a kinetic manner is its prominence within the new town, and especially that central spine. I think Mr. Hancock mentioned this himself yesterday as one traverses up and down the core of that spine. So we have we have, if you take some of my figures, sorry, if we can go to my appendix or document 2, if possible.
I'm there.
So starting at figure 4, just to take you through, Mum, we have figure 4, obviously with the alignment on the central spine, we can see the architectural quality that Ms. Markham just described to you is quite prominent in these views from the spine, as it is from figure 5 as well, which has been referred to as the postcard view yesterday. Also views closer up in East Square. And then if we look at the existing situation, so we're going to jump forward now to my figure 13. We can see whilst, as I've mentioned in my proof, there are factors that have detracted from the setting of Brooke House, but the appreciation of that piece of architecture in that townscape within the town centre, or the core, as Mr. Hancock called it yesterday, is still legible and very much appreciable, both from the positions of figure 13, figure 15 as well, and then from some areas outside as well, figure 16. Ms. Markham noted rebuttal evidence about the locations of some of my viewpoints, many of which are similar to the ones in the TVIA produced by Montague Evans. However, the point I would make is this isn't a stationary experience. I won't go over it too much because it was covered yesterday, but it's very much a kinetic experience. Yeah. And I don't think I need to say anything more, actually, Mum, because you've done a site visit, or I understand you're going to do one. So I think you'll be able to take a view when walking down that central spine if Brooke House, through its alignment, it is prominent, and that architectural quality that's been outlined to you by the other parties can be appreciated.
Okay. Sorry, from that, Mr. Murphy, as I understand it, you agree that the placement and the alignment contributes to significance, and you've just explained.
Absolutely, in terms of that new town design as well. Absolutely.
Okay, then. So really, so far we've got broad agreement. Where we're disagreeing is the point that Mr. Murphy has raised. And looking at the listing description, it's a sentence, Mr. Murphy, that you just pointed out to me about Brooke House was designed to introduce high-density residential accommodation into Basildon Town Centre. I don't think that's controversial. Sorry, I'm looking for not of it. We've been over that ground. And visually, to provide a dominant vertical landmark to counterbalance the predominantly horizontal emphasis of the surrounding shop. So this is coming on to the height of the building and how the height of the building contributes to its significance. Now, Mr. Murphy, is there anything else you have sort of jumped onto that, but is there anything else that you want to say to me on that point?
No, I think in terms of what's in my proof, I think you've got the paragraph 37 and 38 of the appeal decisions the appeal decision from Market Square, also paragraph 43 from the point you just made, I forgot to mention, in terms of East Walk facing westward, the looming dominance of Brooke House would remain foremost. So I think looking at the appeal decision from Market Square, the listing description and the evidence in my proof, plus some of the quotes that I've given you from the appellant's heritage statement in my proof of evidence, I don't think I have anything more to add.
So the height, it's the two things, it's the height and the preeminence of the building, you're saying to me. Is
yes,
that right?
It was designed to be a prominent, tall landmark building. And as one experiences the building today, that element is very legible still. So the prominence and the preeminence of Brooke House, its height is a factor in that because it rises above the lower surrounding context. So in terms of experiencing the asset, its height must be a contribution to its significance because that permits the landmark role that it was designed to have, and which remains legible in the townscape today, as I hope you'll experience when you walk down that central spine and around those viewpoints in a kinetic experience.
I have already visited site.
Fantastic.
I've already visited site. I will go back there. Ms. Markham, is there anything that you wish to add? I don't want to go over.
No, I mean,
just how it contributes to the significance of the building, the height and preeminence.
Yes, I mean, clearly it is a tall building, and that was, providing a vertical counterpoint to the horizontal emphasis was part of the sort of design rationale. But I think my main point is that its landmark role is not the reason that it's listed. It's really to do with the architectural interest of it. As I set out before, you could have had other tall buildings built for the same reasons that wouldn't have been listed, because they wouldn't have been of sufficient architectural interest. So it really is the architectural interest of the building.
Okay, so Miss Markham, in terms of the contribution of its height and preeminence to its significance.
Yes, I mean, I think the preeminence, as the Inspector Rose found, is really to do with the form of the building, the sort of crystalline form and the architectural expression, and the sort of interplay of the horizontality of the shops. I think it's the parade of shops, which is part of our site, and the verticality, the sort of perpendicular relationship.
Okay, Mr. Hancock, can I ask you the same question, please?
Yes, not a great deal to add, Ma'am, other than to say, as I think we're sort of drawing out, is a slightly more nuanced point than just saying it's tall, therefore it's interesting. It's the preeminence derives from a combination of the architecture and the overall height and form and massing of the building. It's not a particularly tall building. The article makes reference to that. It's not like we've got a sort of vertical, a very vertically oriented spine or landmark, or it's not a we could be looking at a I don't know, a Hyde Park Barrack type sort of totem, and actually it reads more as a box, a tall box, let's be clear, but a box, it is that interplay of the pilotis and its positioning and the architecture that creates the prominence when you're going up and down that spine. Sometimes it's an extremely visible feature, sometimes it's not, but it's always arresting because of that interplay of architecture and overall height.
Okay, I understand. I'm going to move on to setting, but just before I do that, can I ask Miss Markham, please? You've commented on proposed alterations to the pilotis, proposed alterations there. What are you saying about that? You're suggesting that it would diminish significance.
Yes, I mean, I think it was there's sort of 2 points that are related to that. It's partly, I suppose, to draw attention to, or while the sort of external form of the building is clearly of architectural interest, there are some issues with it, with the way that the design was realised. The flats are all single aspect because it has a spine corridor. There are no balconies and there's no communal amenity space. The crittle windows have poor thermal performance, poor safety performance. The spine corridor is very dark. The staircases aren't fully enclosed. The ground floor is not universally accessible. Apparently there are issues with wind beneath the podium. I don't know if that's true. I haven't done a wind analysis. So I suppose that's to say there are sort of issues with the functionality of the building.
Okay, there are issues with the functionality of the building, but does that impact on significance?
I think probably it does detract somewhat from the architectural interest, not in the external expression, but it's sort of the building's obviously not working very well. And then related to that, there has been an application to resolve some of those issues. And I think probably the most significant intervention involves infilling the space beneath the pilotis.
The box underneath.
Yeah, and that's
yeah.
still as far as I understand it, to deal with providing level access.
Yeah.
For everybody. I mean, I think it might be worth just having a look at one of the images from that application. If we go to my appendix at page 117.
Yeah, so effectively that there are two boxes that would sit beneath within the pilotis.
Exactly, and then I think it's the southern staircase would be pulled right down to ground level.
Yeah.
And I personally think this is a really significant intervention in probably the most important architectural aspect of the building. And I was really just drawing attention to the fact that Place Services did the heritage assessment for this application and didn't ascribe any harm to this aspect of the proposals. And I think that's inconsistent with the finding of less than substantial harm from the low to middle and in our setting effect. And I know that Mr. Murphy reviewed that heritage statement. So it's more about the kind of consistency of the council's position.
Okay.
And also just to make the point that the council are the applicant of that proposal.
Okay. What's the status of that proposal?
I think it's being determined at the moment. It was submitted in November.
Okay, so it's under consideration at the moment.
Yes, as far as I understand.
Okay, so Mr. Murphy, do you have anything to say on that? I don't want to get too embroiled with this, but
that's fine, Mum. Unfortunately, we moved on. Is it okay just for two very quick points on what we were discussing before? That there was just two things I just wanted to go back to, very quick points. One was Ms. Markham mentioned that the height and so on. She's mentioned several facets of significance and mentioned that it wouldn't be listed for this reason in its own right. And whether I agree with that or not is immaterial. For an attribute to contribute to significance doesn't need to be listable in its own right. It is an important. It's been mentioned a few times. And the other one is also just in the Heritage Townscape and Visual Impact Assessment CD6, just at paragraph 5.18. The scale of it just mentions the scale of Brook House means it is visually prominent, even a dominant feature in the surrounding townscape, and that's in Montague Evans' own assessment. So the point I'm making is to ignore the height and preeminence of the building is in contrast to the recent inspector's decision at paragraph 38. And that's in the setting section also, that Montague Evans quote is in the setting section. In terms of and just on Mr. Hancock's point, I disagree that it's not a tall building. I think it is a tall building. We're not in Hyde Park, we're in Basildon. It's a tall building surrounded by low rise. I don't think it's a box. I completely disagree with that analysis. In terms of the point that we just discussing on the proposal, I was involved myself. I wrote the heritage statement to inform that proposal, and my colleague did the impact assessment. I reviewed that assessment, the whole document, which I take responsibility for as well. And it was through our involvement in that we managed to preserve the townscape role, because Ms. Markham helpfully shows some of the earlier iterations of design, and there were actually early ones from that which involved cladding and all sorts. And our feeling is that those boxes at the bottom were a reversible intervention, and they didn't diminish the fact that you could still experience the architectural interest of the building itself. So that it is a new intervention, and I think that's where just because it's changed doesn't mean it's harmful. It's about appropriate change. And so I'm not going to go fully into it. Ms. Markham hasn't undertaken her own assessment of this proposal either, but my opinion is that this intervention in between the pilotis wouldn't detract from the appreciation of the architectural interest at that level.
I understand, and that's your professional view, and we've already defined the status of that proposal, so I don't really want to go into that too much. Okay, I want to move on to looking at the setting of the building. So can I look, is there anything else, looking to advocates, is there anything else that you want to ask?
Sorry, Mum, just very quickly, can I just put a point of clarification from a criticism from Mr. Murphy? I didn't say that it wasn't a tall building.
I understand what you said.
Thank you.
I understand what you said. Okay, thank you. So if we move on to the setting of this building, and this is where there is disagreement between you. We know that there's disagreement on the townscape role, the height and the preeminence of the building and that discussion. Could I ask Mr. Murphy, first of all, we've got an immediate setting and we've got a wider setting. Okay, please can you just, first of all, what includes the immediate setting? I think that we've done that, and there's fairly common ground there. Am I having nods that we've defined the immediate setting? Does anybody want to set that out for me just quickly so that we've all got a complete understanding there?
I would suggest that the immediate setting is East Square and the immediate proximity where you're experiencing the lower part of the structure, the pilotis and so on, and the architectural interest that Ms. Markham articulated, close up and then further away, especially along that spine corridor from some of the viewpoints.
So it includes the relationship between the horizontal and vertical elements. That's within the immediate setting.
I think it's within the immediate and further away as well.
Right. Yeah,
And
okay.
I can explain that more in a moment.
Okay, so let's look at the wider setting then, Mr. Murphy.
So in terms of the wider setting, I think we're still in that central spine core, because I think in the immediate setting where we're at East Square and so on, that's where we can really appreciate the architectural quality. As we move further away, we're appreciating the architectural and the landmark quality of the building. So if we look at the viewpoints, viewpoint 13, we're kind of coming away from Brook House.
Oh, hold on. So we're in the HTBIA.
Oh, sorry, we're in my proof
Hold on.
Sorry, Mum. The document 2.
Okay, so you're further further along the east-west spine.
That's it, figure 13. And as we move away, that's correct, Ma'am. We're in the wider setting there. We experience more of the townscape and landmark role in relation relative to those lower stories. And then also, if we look at figure 15, figure 16, and again, just to be clear, this is a kinetic experience. Whilst I've chosen a point at figure 15, I'm not saying one would walk to this point, stand there, and as one moves through that spine, through East Walk and so on. Same at figure 16 as well. I chose this one on the other side of the fire station within the ring road there, because I think you do get a better appreciation.
Sorry, hold on there, hold on. Sorry, you're at,
Sorry.
Where are you now?
Figure 16, just by the car park there.
Oh, yes, that's the car park. Yeah.
And in my opinion, I would just to clarify, I do agree that the cinema, it has had an adverse effect, but not to the extent where it has removed that landscape role or the appreciation of it from those viewpoints. And then we move beyond as well. So, you know, the furthest away is my figure 17. But the HTVIA provides much more viewpoints where you can see Brook House in the further environs, the wider environs of the site, from where one can appreciate it as a tall building set within Basildon and a waymarker for the settlement. Paragraph 45 of the Market Square decision notes, it's in the context of this decision, but it mentions the singular landmark quality of Brook House. And then if we go to the earlier paragraph 42, there's it mentions that some of the other buildings, such as Great Oaks, is a subordinate composition, and mentions status and standing of Brook House and so on and so forth. So it's very clear that in the wider, from the appeal decision, from documented sources, from the views provided by all parties, I think, it's very clear that in the wider environs, one can experience the significance or the attribute of setting that contributes to significance, which is the landmark status of Brook House. and it's clear that that contributes to its significance.
Okay, could I ask Ms. Markham the same question, please? In terms of
so that's really about the wider
setting, the wider setting and the contribution of the wider setting to the significance of the listed building, please.
Absolutely. Before I move on to the wider setting, I just wanted to make one comment, which you may well have picked up on already from the written material, about the cinema application and the fact that that involves some alterations to the listed landscape, which I think were damaging, and actually Place Services recommended refusal for that application. And
to the Sunken Square.
Yeah,
they've already been carried out, haven't they?
And the construction of the cinema, which involved demolition of Freedom House. And yes, Place Services recommended refusal for that application on heritage grounds, and the 20th Century Society strongly objected to it. And that was another application by the council. So I think in terms of that sunken landscape, it does still make an important contribution to the sort of immediate setting and the appreciation of the significance of Brook House, but it has been diminished by those council developments. Now, moving on to the sort of wider setting, I mean, I think the location of Brook House is at a place of townscape importance. It's at the east end of Town Square. And it's also on the primary east-west route, the sort of access through the town centre, and it's also located on a north-south access as well. So sort of similar to the appeal site, it's an important site within the town centre. And I recognise that it was constructed as a landmark to identify the town centre, but there are other tall buildings now. And as I've set out before, I don't think its role as a landmark is sufficient to merit listing on its own right. In terms of the sort of wider... But
Ms. Markham, Mr. Murphy's already made the point that, you know, it's not about... I'm looking for the contribution that height makes to the significance of the listed building. I accept that probably height or its landmark value wouldn't lead to its listing in its own right, but it's really the contribution that aspect makes to its significance, isn't it?
I suppose, I mean, I think really you need to be relatively close to the building to appreciate its architectural interest. So while you can see it, you know, in the very distant views, you wouldn't be able to identify it as a listed building in those very distant views. And you can make it out on the skyline. And if you've got prior knowledge, you can say, oh, well, that's Brook House and that's listed. But that doesn't really contribute to its significance, in my view. The fact that you can see it from far and around. It's really the kind of near views from Town Square and East Square, where you can really appreciate the relationship of the pilotti and the elevations, and the relationship with the sort of horizontality and the verticality, where you appreciate its significance. I mean, I know yesterday we had a look at a lot of the views. I won't take you back to all of those, but we had a look at the view from East Walk, and I think certainly when it was built, that view would have contributed to its the appreciation of its significance. Unfortunately, there's been quite a lot of harm to that view in terms of the cinema development blocking the building. But I think it does still make some contribution to its significance along that east-west axis. And I suppose the only other point I was going to make was about the Stadkrone. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Mr. Hill will correct me if I've got it wrong. Because I know that in Mr. Murphy's proof, he described Brook House as a Stadkrone, which is a sort of function of its height, I suppose. And I've, in my rebuttal, I've responded to that. I reproduced the article from, just get my rebuttal up so that I can.
I've seen that. So you're disagreeing with the.
Yes, it's my paragraph 134. So it's Bruno Taut's article from 1919, and and basically he's very specific about what this city crown would be. It comprises 4 tall buildings at the centre of a city with the main roads radiating from it. The buildings would be arranged like a cross with a massive glass structure above them, and it was to contain public uses such as the opera, theatre, community centre, meeting hall. So none of that describes Brook House. So I just wanted to, set clear that I really don't agree with that Brook House is a Stradcorny.
Okay, so Miss Markham, in all of that, what is the contribution of the wider setting to the significance of the listed building?
I think it's very limited.
And so in terms of the setting, sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but
I think that it's because you can't appreciate the architectural interest of the listed building in the wider setting. I think the contribution of the wider setting to Brook House is very limited. It's much more to do about the architectural interests of the building and its sort of immediate townscape relationship with East Square and Town Square and indeed the sort of low-rise bit of the appeal side up until where you get to Northgate House.
Okay, and could I go back to Mr. Murphy, please? The contribution of the wider setting to the significance of the listed building. Could I just have how do you assess that? You're on mute, Mr. Murphy.
Thanks. I think I can be helpful here, Mum, to establish some common ground with Miss Markham and then lead on to that. So Miss Markham talks about the architectural interest of the building and how that can be appreciated in close views of the building. I don't dispute that at all. I think when we're in those close-up views, you can see the pilotis and so on and so forth. So I absolutely don't debate that when you're close to the building is some of the best places to appreciate the architectural interest. However, in the wider environs of the sites, one doesn't have to be able to see the pilotis or be able to see exactly how the building's articulated in its architectural interest to appreciate its landmark status and the significance of its landmark status. There's numerous other types of landmark buildings. If one takes a church that's designed to be an ecclesiastical waymarker and seen from as far afield as possible, of course, when one can see a church tower or a church spire, they're not going to be able to appreciate, a lot of churches are grade 1 on their architectural interest. One wouldn't be able to appreciate the architectural interest from a mile away of the thing, but they would understand its landmark contribution to its significance, and that's one of the key points. The Stadcron reference that's taken. I've referenced.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
So you're saying that it's in the wider setting, it's the landmark value.
Exactly that is.
No, I understand that point. I understand that point. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the second point that Markham made about the Stadcron. If that's the right way to pronounce it, we're all pronouncing it differently.
I don't, to be honest, I don't see it as an overly key point in my evidence, but I basically took a lead on the Stadcron from what I referenced it from, which was the heritage statement for the Market Square appeal, where the heritage statement actually references itself. So I've simply referred to a previous heritage specialist who's used the phrase in the same manner. But as I say, in terms of understanding the landmark contribution to significance, I'm not relying on that term, but other heritage specialists have used it and townscape specialists as well.
Okay, is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise in respect of the setting, the immediate setting and the wider setting of the listed building?
Mum, I'm sorry, I haven't said anything on this issue. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just very quickly, there's just a couple of points. The first point I wanted to pick up, just in relation to the point that Mr. Murphy has just made on wider setting in church spires and everything else. I just want to draw to your attention paragraph 14 of GPA 3, which may be of assistance in this regard. It's about church spires, but and I think it's interesting because what GPA 3 is seeking to do is to say, just because you can see a church spire from a distance doesn't mean that view is significant. It's also not trying to say those views won't be significant, because as long as you can appreciate the just give me one. Sorry about that. I think it's just, I think what that then tells.
Sorry,
yeah.
Mr. Hancock, what are you referring to, please?
So that was GPA 3, the setting of heritage assets.
Yes.
And paragraph 14 within that, it talks about needing careful analysis of whether or not a church spire's visibility and prominence is significant, contributes towards significance. And it's not also saying if you can see a church spire in a long range view, but you can't see its detailing, that view is not significant. But it helps us, I think, in terms of Brook House, because the question then becomes whether or not those longer views are actually of interest, have a degree of design or intent, or tell us something about the building. And I think what is common ground between us is that when we're talking about immediate setting, we're talking about East Square, and to an extent Town Square. You extend yourself out into the core, but in order to have the building then disappears in the wider periphery, so it's not tall enough to have that landmark roll through there as a consistent feature of its significance. And then when you move further afield, it becomes impacted upon and influenced by the taller buildings. So it's landmark role when we're talking about that. And when we're talking about wider setting in inverted commas, I think we still are very much talking about the core as the location where you can appreciate the townscape role as a landmark, because it's not tall enough to serve a genuine landmark role within wider Basildon, in my view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hancock. Miss Markham?
Yes, I mean, I agree with what Mr. Hancock was saying in reference to the church spire, and I had another point in terms of the sort of Mr. Murphy's reference to a church spire. And I think there is a difference between a church spire that you can see at a distance and Brook House, in that there is an architectural expression in a spire which you can read at a very considerable distance, and you know, there's a beauty to that. Which I don't think Brook House has at that distance. It's much more attractive and in the near views than it is in the distance. Whereas a church is both attractive, both in the distance and the near views, and that's the beauty of a spire.
Thank you, Miss Markham. Mr. Murphy.
Just two quick points, Mum. I wish I hadn't used the church as an example, because it would have saved us some time.
Yes.
My point was, any tall building which is designed to have a landmark function, which is well established in Brook House in the listing description, if we just read that, the point can be made of any tall building. As you move further away from a tall building that has a landmark function, you will probably not be able to appreciate its architectural interest as if you're close to the building. So that's just the one point. So it doesn't have to be a church. That was just the first thing that come to mind, Mark. The second point is, and I agree with Mr. Hancock in that the setting of heritage asset guidance is important, but I would point out that only myself and Ms. Markham have actually done an assessment. In fact, Mr. Hancock hasn't even referenced the setting of heritage asset guidance in his proof of evidence, let alone undertake the prescribed methodology of assessing this proposal as set out in the setting of heritage assets. So I just wanted to point out that whilst Mr. Hancock is mentioning the setting of heritage asset guidance, he's not referenced it in his proof, nor has he undertaken the prescribed methodology that is outlined, the steps 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hancock.
Yes, I mean, you know, as you're aware, I'm not undertaking the full assessment here. I don't think it undermines what I'm doing that we haven't referenced that specifically. Okay. I just made that reference as a specific point. The one thing I did want to say is that I don't think it's unhelpful, that point, because although church spires are a different building typology, my point is about landmark status. And of course, a building with supposed landmark status will disappear in longer views occasionally as you move through a townscape. My point more goes back to the overall height point that myself and I think Ms. Markham have made, is that this is not, and it links into the Stadtkrone point as well, that what you do not see in the context of Brook House is a building that is sufficiently tall and sufficiently dominant over its landscape to have a really wide and broad landmark function. The reference back to the list description, as I said to you yesterday, Ma'am, that list description talks about the townscape function and landmark function within a very limited range. And I think the degree to which it doesn't have, it doesn't have the role that other tall buildings have in terms of appearing in longer vistas, longer design vistas. You know, Bruno Taut's talking about planned town, of which, you know, Basildon is a planned town with long routes, you know, axial routes coming out from its centre that allow this building at the centre to be a focus. You don't see that in Basildon. That's not a clearly defined and legible piece of design intent. So I just wanted to make that point, really, because that's where it links back to this question. The question that GPA3 is asking you is whether or not there is are you just seeing it, or is there an intent to be seen over a long range?
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Mr. Murphy?
Ma'am, just very quickly, as I said before, I think you'll be able to make your own conclusion on the landmark function, having the kinetic experience and the experience from some of those viewpoints. And then paragraph 37 of the Market Square decision, it can be said without controversy that Brook House provides a landmark function in the town centre, rising from its whole height, bulk, architectural design and detailing. So I think when we look at the listing description, the appeal decision and the assessments, it's quite clear the landmark intent of Brook House, and that is still legible and can be appreciated and contributes to its significance. But I think you can, in your own experience of walking around, you'll be able to draw your own conclusion on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, is there anything else that anybody wants to raise or ask in relation to the contribution of setting to significance? If we can...
Ma'am, can I just say that in relation to that last point of Mr. Murphy's, of course, he's referring you back to paragraph 37 of the decision letter in the Orwell appeal, and that of course, is all in relation to the townscape role of Brook House, which we dealt with yesterday. The heritage issues are dealt with separately in the decision letter, and there's not a complete read across between the two sections.
Yeah, okay. Is there anything that anybody would like to ask? Okay.
Sorry, Ma'am. Yes, in the appeal decision at paragraph 103, we identified a problem.
Sorry, I'm going to have to turn that up.
In the heritage section. It's in the heritage section at paragraph 103. Essex County Council's Place Services identified Brook House, a prominent and landmark building of the Newtown development, would experience change to its setting, resulting less than substantial harm at the lower end of the scale. So just to point you to that there, Mum.
Okay. Okay, can we swiftly move on? Is there anything, the next thing on my agenda is the contribution of the site to significance. I think we've probably covered this. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to say on that matter, the contribution that the site makes to the significance? You've gone into it in some detail, Miss Markham. Yeah,
I have in my proof. I have, and I think sort of in the discussion we've covered the fact, and actually, Mr. Murphy helpfully read out my proof.
I know.
But I think basically the 2- and 3-story range does contribute positively to Brook House because of this sort of horizontality and the way that.
Sorry, Miss Markham, and that's a point that you agree with, Mr. Murphy, isn't it? That 19 to 33, and you put in your evidence, Miss Markham.
Paragraph 7.34, yes, Mum.
Yeah, So we're all in agreement on that. Yeah.
The only other point that I don't think's been covered yet is the contribution of Northgate House and the former MS, which I think detracts from the setting and the appreciation of significance of Brook House, because they have a different character. And I think we did cover it yesterday, that the appeal decision on Orwell, the appeal inspector there had some comments on it, that the M&S, a former M&S, was drab and uninviting. That's paragraph 50. He said the cladding on Northgate House was eye-catching at paragraph 10, and that there's an increased building height at paragraph 53. I mean, I agree that the cladding's eye-catching on Northgate House, but I think it's actually not attractive. That's a sort of negative feature. And just to draw your attention to, again, I think this was covered yesterday, the fact that Pevsner describes that part of the site as a decline in vision and a mess.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that has a negative impact on the setting of Brook House and of its significance.
Thank you, Ms. Markham. Mr. Murphy, could I ask you to address that point about we're in agreed with 19 to 33? What about the rest of the site?
So the what Ms. Markham just referred to, obviously that's a recladding of an existing building, is my understanding. So the datum height has remained in terms of that bulk and massing. So in terms of the contribution when we're looking at scale and the landmark status of Brook House and its prominence that we've just discussed, the recladding of that building wouldn't have removed or detracted from that aspect of its significance.
No, okay, but what do you say about Northgate House?
The cladding.
No, not the cladding. I'm not interested in the cladding. Sorry, about its height and scale.
Well, it preserves the datum of the building that was pre-existing, so I don't think it detracts from the significance of Brook House, would be my opinion.
Okay, and what about the M&S? Do you want to say anything about that?
No, I don't think so. No, I think there's been change in Basildon as a whole that's been that's maybe not been as sympathetic, but I don't think none of it has removed or considerably detracted from the significance of Brook House at all in any of the developments today.
Okay. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to say or ask on that point?
The only point that I wanted to clarify, sorry to interrupt, was that I think Northgate House, the sort of L-shaped block above it, was added later, the 3 stories. It was originally offices and then converted to residential, just to clarify that. That's my understanding.
Sorry, that it was offices and then converted to
residential, and I think the 3 stories was added later, the additional, because it's 6 stories high, so it's got a datum of 3 stories, and then above that there's an L-shaped block, office block, that was converted to residential. It was originally office blocks.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Murphy, is anybody able to help us with that?
I'm not going to disagree with Ms. Markham. I don't know to the contrary, but I would say that whilst that might detract in townscape terms, in terms of heritage significance, which isn't my specialism, townscape, but in terms of heritage significance, I don't think it detracts. In terms of the significance of Brook House, I don't think it does.
Okay then, so should we move on to the design response as we've reframed it, but
unless, ma'am, you were thinking about having a short break.
Sorry?
I said, ma'am, unless you were thinking that this was a convenient point to have a short break.
I wasn't. But why are you wanting? Is anybody else?
It's just your hour and a half is up, ma'am. So I just thought you might want me to prompt you about that.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to deal with proposed design response, and then we'll take a break and we'll deal with impact of proposed development. Miss Markham, would you like to lead on this?
Sure, no problem. I think probably the best place to go is paragraph 185 of my both my main proof and my summary. And this describes how the design is given careful consideration to brick house. And I'll sort of go through each of these points. So firstly, the proposed arrangement of the podium and the towers responds to the existing architectural arrangement of brick house and the site. Secondly, the design retains much of the existing podium, or it's rebuilt at the same scale to provide a new structure to support the additional towers. So the podium is retained, essentially. Gosh, it seems to be going dark in here. Anyway, maybe that doesn't matter. Thirdly, the two-storey range directly adjacent to brick house is retained, along with the adjacent three-storey units. And I think that's really important because that drop in scale, especially to the two stories, adds to the sort of drama of brick house and the height of that. And that's preserved. So that contrast in scale and the sort of dramatic emphasis is retained. Fourth, the proposed towers are located at the west end and the middle of the block, and there's a considerable separation distance of at least 60 metres to brick house. Fifth, Tower A is located in the southwest corner, and that forms a counterpoint to brick house, so that they form bookends to the block, and that's something that was recognised in the Place Services Urban Design Response of March 2021. Sixth, the scale of the towers largely steps down towards brick house from Tower A, which is ground plus 22 stories, then to Tower B, which is ground plus 17, then Tower C, which is ground plus 16, and then up to Tower D, which is ground plus 18. So there is an exception with that with Tower D, which steps up slightly from Tower C, but it's offset from brick house to the north of the podium. And then I've sort of taken 2 points there. So I think that gives us a seventh point. The detailed design responds to the architecture of brick house. So for example, in the elevations of Tower A, they have this faceted angles, which responds to the B-shaped windows of brick house. And in terms of the illustrative design for Tower D, that's in brick, which is the same materiality as brick house. And then I think the final point is that the roof gardens and green roofs on the podium will improve the outlook from the flats, which are located on the western side of brick house. So that's going to have both a positive visual effect and sort of amenity effect, and also a positive setting effect on the kind of functionality of brick house for its original use.
Okay. We've actually been through that before, haven't we, in your summary in chief. Okay then, so Mr. Murphy, I think I understand your position on this, but if you'd just like to articulate it.
Yeah, I don't consider there to be any benefits. It's more found in the principle, the height, the cluster of these buildings. And I'm going to be careful not to strange your next section of impact, Ma'am. I mean, I suppose when we look at paragraph 7.34 in Ms. Markham's proof and the importance of numbers 19 to 33, and then we go forward to 1.84, and it mentions about the same numbers 19 to 33 set forward and springing upwards. It seems to contradict itself slightly in my mind, in that we've got this low-rise composition which contributes to setting, and then this same contribution springing upwards. I don't think there's an issue with the principle of this development which can't be overcome by design mitigation. So yeah, I don't find any benefits.
So your position is that those aren't benefits, those aren't ways in which to maximise any enhancement?
So for it to be a heritage benefit, one would have to ascribe how the significance of Brook House is enhanced. And I my opinion is I don't think the significance of Brook House is enhanced by any of these aspects of the proposals.
No,
And I won't come on to harm. I don't want to stray into that now, but until you ask. But yeah, I don't think any of these aspects enhance the significance of Brook House.
I understand that point. We have been over the what the appellant perceives as the benefits of the scheme, so I don't want to rehearse that.
I did have, because I think that section I just sort of explained how the design responds to Brook House, and I haven't actually explained the benefits as I see them, which do overlap a little bit, but if I could just sort of take you through that,
go on then. That'd
be much appreciated. So as I've explained, I think that the former M&S and the Northgate house detract from Brook House, and actually in a way that the Orwell site didn't. So redeveloping and altering these buildings will improve their appearance and their functionality, and that will be an enhancement to the setting of Brook House and its appreciation of its significance. So, for example, the frontage of Northgate House is going to be activated at upper levels with those elevated galleries, because at the moment it's very blank at upper level. And the experience of arrival, both from the high pavement and the low pavement to Brook House, which are both routes that you could take to Brook House, will be enhanced. I've mentioned already that the podium gardens will improve the outlook from Brook House. I identify that as a benefit. And I also think that there are going to be many more people living, assuming this proposal is approved, living and working in the appeal site, and they'll have views from the podium gardens of Brook House. So there'll be more people to appreciate its architectural quality. And finally, there'd be beneficial movement, activity, and improvements to economic viability, which will enhance the setting of Brook House. And those are all factors that are recognised as relevant in GPA 3, the setting guidance.
Mr. Murphy?
Thank you, Mum. I suppose the only question, the only thing I question about the statements just made is what aspects of significance is enhanced? Is it the appreciation of the architectural interest, the historic interest, the landmark status that's been identified in as an attribute of setting that contributes to significance? We mentioned creation of new views towards from the top of the podium. As I understand, there was never intended to be views from the top of the podium towards Brook House, so I don't consider that to be just because there's a new view, it doesn't mean that it's beneficial. In fact, it's away from the views that Brook House was to be intended to be seen from. So in what Ms. Markham's just described, whilst there might, I'm not a Townscape expert, there may be Townscape benefits, but in terms of enhancing aspects of Brook House's significance, I don't know what attribute any of them are enhancing. Mm-hmm. And it's not dependent on this scheme of 4 tower blocks to deliver those, surely. The benefits that Ms. Markham just said.
Can I respond on that?
Yes, you can.
Yes, I mean, I think it's the architectural significance of Brook House that's enhancing those aspects, because all those benefits relate to the appearance of the surroundings of Brook House and the way that it functions as well. And in terms of there was no intention to have views from the podium. I don't think that matters. The fact if we're creating new views, and that's definitely beneficial, and there'll be more people to appreciate the significance of Brook House, and it's clear in the setting guidance that the creation of additional views it can be a benefit.
Okay. Okay, is there anything else to take, Mr. Murphy?
Yeah, sorry, just not to go over the same points again, but again, just because just emphasise, just because there is a new view doesn't mean it's beneficial. But also, in terms of what we've described, well, what all of us have discussed earlier about the appreciation of its architectural interest in terms of the pilotis, the windows, the landmark, everything that's been discussed up to this point, I still don't think, despite what Ms. Markham said, that the appreciation that we can currently have of its architectural interest is going to be enhanced by what's just been described to you. I think the architectural interest that we can view now and appreciate now would be no greater enhanced after this scheme has been completed, if it were to be.
Okay then. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to ask?
Ma'am, that was the one point on your agenda where I said Mr. McCarr might have an input. I don't have any contact with Mr. McCarr. I don't know whether he's heard what has just transpired. Yes. So I'm just keen that I wouldn't want him to make a contribution that hadn't had regard to the points you've already heard, but equally I wouldn't want the moment to pass without him having the opportunity to deal specifically with your point 8. Yes. I can't see him on the call at the moment, but that's
right. He has been on the call, he has been listening, and I can see him waving now. Yes, good. He has. Mr. McCarr, I want you to keep it very specifically to a benefit to the significance of the listed building, please. I don't want general benefits of the scheme, please.
Absolutely, I understand. So can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so just, and I will actually make a couple of specific, all of them architectural points, with specific reference to some of the pages in my proof. Our architectural response is a direct reflection of lessons we have learned, lessons we are learning from Brookhouse, and an appreciation of it and its qualities in a number of ways. The first way is its very spectacular and wonderful portico, the base of the building. It's highly permeable and it's a grand order. If you look at page 40 of our proof, I mean, do you want to go page? I've only got about 5 of these references. Do you want? Is it valuable? I mean, they're relevant images. You've seen them before, but I could just.
Sorry, which image is it? Which image?
Okay, page 40. It is top right. It's a photograph of the portico.
Oh, okay.
So I could just verbally describe these points to you if you want to go a tiny bit faster, or you can look at them. It's up to you, Mum, if you want them more specific. Page
okay, sorry, I'm not quite sure the point you're making. So
well, the point is that we have created a direct echo or reflection of that grand portico, okay, and its permeability, its flow, which brings me on to my next point, that it is a proportioning piece, a quality of Brookhouse, which we have picked up on it in a very strong way in our base zone, our podium zone, and our triple story cut. Not to copy it in any way, but to learn from it and reflect that quality. The second point is on a number of fronts. We are creating the architecture of movement, which is functional because people move in different routes. I've described those, connections between levels, and the permeability of this portico, but also with reference, I'm now going to refer to page 33, top right. This is another photo of Brookhouse. It's a piece of Brookhouse that's kind of interesting. It's a bridge link. There are other aspects of Brookhouse which reflect movement. It is actually a dynamic building. Its primary nature is base and upper, with the base being permeable and public, as well as the lobby, and the upper being a box full of dwellings with a very strong texture and character. But the architecture of movement is the second aspect of what we've learned from and wanted to use in a very big way in our design on a number of fronts. The third point, which is extremely obvious, is the upper crystal nature of the facade. And just to say that not only is it, as has been described, glazed, very faceted, very distinctive, its quality, which also brings with it some problems, is based on the fact that it doesn't have balconies, but it is also alive. And if you look at page 60, 63, page 63 of my proof, you will see an image of then and now, if you like. The glazed bays are in a way fabulous. You know, they look great from outside, and there's an image on that page of what they're like from the inside, an original image. And those windows, those pivoting windows, are continually opening and closing. There are actually overheating problems and all sorts of other inadequacies, but the opening and closing of those windows is something we have emulated. We have, as I've said, and I won't recap it, created much better indoor-outdoor connectivity than Brook House does. But the fact is, these facades are alive. Buildings are alive because people are living in them. And actually, that is a dynamic part of the architectural surface, of the architectural texture. Isn't that not the same, you know, on a hot day and on a cold day, one hour, another hour? It changes. And that is genuinely part of its quality. And we have emulated that. We have created a faceted facade, different from, not copying, different from Brook House, and it's alive, it's changing with a strong indoor-outdoor component. With also, this is really my last architectural point, also with reference to the zigzag faceted crystalline facade, in quite a literal way, we have quoted, if you like, quoted that zigzag. That zigzag is found all over Basildon in different motifs, even in the arcades of St. Martin's Church and the fire station, all sorts of things. But the zigzag has been quoted in the, if you look at the page 20 and 21, the plans, you can see, in fact, you'll have to sort of look closely or zoom in, but you see zigzag facade components to the active frontage. So in the space between us and Orwell at ground floor, that's page 20, the ground floor plan, there is a zigzag faceted facade, so going in, out, which is dynamic, but it is literally a quote. It's not a residential facade in that case, it's a public facade, but it's quoting, it's giving a dynamic to the surface. And the same is true on page 21 on the first floor, and the same is true along high pavement. So these are quotations. And in those kind of respects, there are other, you know, there are patterns, there are surfaces and screens, but we really are quoting, reflecting, and we believe resonating the architectural qualities of Brook House, not to the exclusion of other ideas. There are many things, many aspects to our scheme, but we believe it is learning from, and, you know, to conclude this overall point, in positive dialogue with Brook House, as old and new coexist, two ends of a square are in dialogue with each other, and that is how we believe, you know, heritage in a positive way evolves with one thing following another, and actually enhancing and complementing, in this case, a heritage asset.
Okay, so you're saying that these aspects of your proposal that reinterpret aspects of Brook House will contribute to significance or benefit significance? Yeah,
yes, they will contribute to its setting. Okay. And they will add to, I mean, you know, we use the word singular a lot, but also the word plural, in a plural way, the collective compounding of one original seed, and then time goes on and other things, creating, if you like, positive echo, positive reflection. It's another good analogy. Yes, it will absolutely be an enhancement to the setting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCow. Mr. Murphy, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, I'll just be very quick, Mum. I think there's one important consideration here. There is a very distinct difference between doing a design that is influenced by, or with an aspiration to be influenced by, or in keeping with Brook House, and a design that enhances significance. Nothing you've just heard enhances any attribute of significance of Brook House. And it's that key distinction. There's a difference between an aspiration to be influenced by or to be in keeping with Brook House, and one that enhances an attribute of its significance. And I don't think anything you just heard enhances the significance of Brook House, as has been outlined in everyone's proof.
Okay. Does anybody wish to say anything more on that point?
Sorry, can I just add something? I'm not going to say very much from here on in, because, as you know, Mum, we don't take a view on the scheme. I just wanted to make a point about what Mr. Murphy had said as a point of how we undertake the assessment. I don't. I do want to add that there is a lot. I know I've been criticised for referring to GPA3, which I use on a very much a daily basis, as you'll be aware. But it's not just about. It's about significance and appreciations of that significance. It's something that we see a lot in a lot of the guidance, and I wouldn't want you to take Mr. Murphy's point that he's just made entirely as he's presented it, because I don't think it's wrong for Mr. Macauer to say, and for Ms. Markham to say, that where they have taken jumping off points from Brook House, if they allow the architecture to therefore ingrain and embed Brook House and its qualities more in the public imagination, then that does have the potential to enhance appreciations of that significance. So I just wanted to add that slight gloss to what Mr. Murphy has just said, really.
And I please, may I say one more word, Ma'am?
Mm-hmm.
Very short, about distinctiveness. I feel that when somebody comes to Basildon, I hope more so in the future, that they will not confuse it with Harlow or Stevenage, or the places are different, and I think we will be contributing to the distinctiveness of Basildon in its plural aggregation of the past and the future, but positive dialogue between old and new.
And you're saying that would contribute to the significance of the listed building?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, just very quickly. Again, on Mr. Hancock's point, I won't go over the facts again that he's not provided his own assessment of the impacts of the scheme or the benefits. But in terms of what he said, I don't think anyone has qualified exactly what attribute of significance or experiences it will be enhanced by the scheme of the listed building. I don't think any of that's been put in front of you, but that's all I'll say.
Okay. Could I please say, is GPA3 in the core documents list?
Yes,
Ma'am, yes.
It is. Okay.
And it's
A3, ma'am.
Okay, that's absolutely fine.
A3.
And sorry, Mum, just to add that obviously GPA3, when we're dealing with the setting of heritage assets, is the recognised main tool for dealing with that and assessing the contribution to significance and indeed the impacts, which is how myself and Ms. Markham have undertaken our assessments.
Okay.
Just to add one final point on that, it's page 13 of GPA3, which has got the sort of criteria for when you're doing assessment of the developments. It's worth having a look at those, and it does include factors such as movement, activity, economic viability, those sort of wider things. It's not just a visual thing, basically.
Thank you for that, Ms. Markham. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add on that point? And we'll take a break and then come back and deal with the impacts. Anything? Okay, then it's now 27 minutes past. If we come back at 12 o'clock and we'll deal with the impacts, and then we'll have a short session on the section 106. Thank you very much, everyone. The inquiry is adjourned. Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 12 o'clock and the inquiry is resumed. Can I just pick up on a few housekeeping matters that have arisen during the adjournment? I received an email with a document for, I just received it in the adjournment. It's Safe Rottingdean Limited. Can somebody?
I think that's probably come from our team, and it's another authority related to Bramshill that I would have touched on if we wanted to drill down into that in more detail. I'm perfectly happy not to do so now, and I don't want us to go back on the agenda to the beginning. It's a related point. If it helps, I can show you the paragraph that I was going to draw to your attention, but it's a related point to the Bramshill point. It may be more appropriate to deal with in our legal submissions in due course.
Okay. Are you wanting to add that to the core documents list?
Just by way of advance warning of an authority that may be referred to, yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you are, please can you bring the paragraph that you're referring to my attention in the usual way?
I can do that. I can do that now, Mum, if it's helpful. It's paragraphs 86 and 87.
Okay, when it's put on the core documents list, if you could just refer, make sure that those paragraphs are pointed out. Usually it's on a supplementary sheet or something. Thank you. In terms, I've had a query also on the core docs list. IQ7 were the corrections to Mr. Lowndes' proof. I had an email through. Could somebody make sure that that's circulated around to the appellant? The appellant, I understand, hasn't received that. I know that you did, Mr. Edwards. You confirmed at the time. Sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Edwards.
Sorry about that. I was just.
God, it's the microphone problem again, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, but we'll ensure that
Thank you.
is properly addressed.
Yeah, thank you. It's just that small alteration to the heights of the buildings, isn't it? So yes. That's IQ7, and then a query regarding IQ 10 and 11. IQ 10 are the visuals from Orwell that are referred to in para 40 that we received yesterday. We remember we shared them on the screen, and IQ 11 are the documents relating to the 106 agreement. Those are the title deeds that came through, and that was an email of the 13th of the 1st. Well, I'm not sure about these times. It came through to me at 15:22, but I'm not sure when it was sent through to you. But it's the email with the title documents for the 106. Is there anything else? I think that, okay then, well, let's swiftly move on then. We were mid-discussion on the impacts of the proposed development on the significance of the listed building. Now, in terms of Townscape impacts, we have discussed those at length. Could I just turn to Mr. Murphy, please? Because you indicate in your evidence the impacts on the mass layout and hierarchy. Those are the particular points that you raised. Could I ask you to address those, please?
Yes, ma'am. So in terms of the attributes of significance, that's from GPA 3 that I've highlighted.
Yeah.
And I've given that list there. So in terms of the massing and layout, we've obviously discussed how an attributes of Brookhouse's significance is its landmark status and so on and so forth, and its intent. So the height and massing and location of the proposal, in my opinion, would obviously diminish that. I think Ms. Markham called it yesterday a cluster of buildings. So by consuming Brookhouse into that cluster, in my opinion, can only serve as an adverse effect on that aspect of its significance. And I suppose if I just draw your attention to paragraph 104 of the Land of Market Square decision, which, sorry, Mum, let me hear this.
No, I've got it here.
Oh, sorry, okay.
I've got it right next to me.
Okay, so paragraph 104 says, for my part, it is evident that Brookhouse, a robust building with distinctive architectural language, was designed to be the tallest building in the new town. It remains as a landmark feature and a symbol of the new town movement. The proposed development would bring about change within the setting of Brookhouse as a result of the introduction of a cluster of tall buildings. In my opinion, in local views, these would appear distinct in form and character set well apart from Brookhouse. More widely, the development would appear as an additional element on the skyline, lessening the focus of Brookhouse. Overall, this would amount to less than substantial harm to the significance of the designated heritage asset. So the inspector in the Market Square appeal didn't actually suggest a level of harm to Brookhouse on that spectrum. But even if we took the inspector to mean at the low end of the scale, and we consider the relative proximity and the fact that these buildings are right next to Brookhouse and higher, one can only draw a conclusion that my suggestion towards the middle of the scale on this aspect is more than reasonable if the Market Square decision is identifying less than substantial harm from a cluster of buildings, which it says itself is set well apart. And these aren't set well apart. They're taller than Brookhouse. We can clearly see the impact on views. Is Brookhouse going to be experienced as a landmark building, as the tallest building in the new town? Of course it's not. It's going to be completely consumed by these 4 tower blocks in some of the most important views that one would appreciate its landmark status. So for that reason, we're not talking about substantial harm and the architectural interest that Ms. Markham was talking about earlier. We're talking about less than substantial harm. We've identified that it's a landmark building, and that's one of the key attributes of its setting that contributes to its significance. And I've outlined in my proof that that would absolutely be adversely diminished. And I think that actually accords very well with the Market Square decision as well, when we consider that found less than substantial harm for development that was further away and not as prominent as what we're talking about here.
So Mr. Murphy, so you say it's about the proximity and the position, and you said proximity and higher in your evidence, say proximity and position of development in relation to key views. I don't think we.
No, and the experience, Ma'am, yes. So not just the views, but yeah. So that, as I've said, for that kinetic experience of moving through the new town. So how one experiences. So, for instance, if you turn to my my appendices, and there's a view of. So I'll just give you the number. It's view 13, figure 13.
I'm there.
So figure 13 is a good example, because one could argue that actually, if you took that as a stationary view, the development wouldn't be as apparent as in some of the other views that have been shown. However, when you consider the kinetic experience and moving around that central spine, of course, these tall tower blocks are going to serve to adversely impact on that prominence and that preeminence of Brookhouse. I think there's only one conclusion really that can be drawn in terms of the experience.
Okay, then. So there you're talking about key places. Well, you say in your evidence, key places within the town centre. And do I take those to be the photographs that you've shown me and the places that we've spoken about, that east-west access? I'm sorry, the east-west axis.
Absolutely. And you also have the TVIA as well, where you'll be able to make your own decision on that. You can see the views as existing, where you can see Brookhouse in the wider environs of Basildon, and where they're also obstructed by the development as well. So it's about the kinetic experience, and standing close up to Brook House, of course, that architectural interest that we were talking about isn't as affected. So we're not talking about substantial harm. We're talking about less than substantial harm.
So I'm sorry. So first of all, you say it's about the proximity position of development, and then you've said the preeminence as well, and the fact that it's higher in relation to Brook House, and those are key places within the town centre. But then you say in wider range views, it would compete and diminish the dominance of Brook House.
Yeah, so I've mentioned that halfway through paragraph 6.5 in my proof, considering the appellant's TVIA, the same type of impact is found in their viewpoints. And I've listed viewpoints there to draw your attention to as well.
Yes, okay. What about the silhouette? You also speak about the silhouette, but it would remove its silhouette completely in some views. What views are you referring to there?
Yes, so you've got the wider views from the church where it's completely obscured. And then in terms of as you move down the central spine from, sorry, I'll just pick out some views again. We have figure 16.
Are you in the HTVIA?
Sorry, I'm still in my photographs.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah.
So we have, so we've got figure 15 there, but I'd say as you move around, the silhouette would be lost in as I say, in the kinetic experience. We have figure 16. There's figure 17. But I think in combination of my views, obviously my views don't include the as proposed. So the TVIA that's been produced would be the document that would better inform the level of impact and the loss of that silhouette. Yeah.
But what you're saying, and we've walked through those views on a number of occasions. I don't think we need to do it again. But what you're saying is that it would compete and diminish the dominance of Brook House. I'm actually reading from your proof.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then you speak about diurnal changes as well. Can you explain what you?
So diurnal changes is again an attribute of significant that's mentioned in a non-exhaustive GPA free list. As in winter, obviously it'd be earlier in the day, in summer later in the day, but the prominence of Brook House, if you imagine that building with all of its lights on, would be quite a considerable illuminated way marker, and its dominance would be experienced in that, because we don't just experience Brook House in the day, of course, we experience it at night and at dusk as well. So with the same types of impacts in that cluster, that prominence is again lost in diurnal changes, because you're going to have another 4 blocks with all their light on as well, and so on and so forth. So that prominence is not just lost in the daytime experience, but also in the nighttime and the dusk experience as well. That's what's meant by the diurnal changes, Mum. Okay,
could I just turn to Miss Markham, please, or Mr. Hancock? Would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, before, if you'll forgive me, I'd like to go back to GPA 3 just on the enhancement point, because I looked up in GPA 3, there's a relevant paragraph that I wanted to draw your attention to on enhancements, and then I'll deal with the impact. So it's core document A3.
I'm there.
And it's paragraph 38, which is on the sort of PDF 18. Page 18.
Right.
It defines what enhancements could encompass. So there's a number that I think that we achieve by the proposals. So the first bullet point: removing or remodeling an intrusive building or feature. And then sort of related to that, the next bullet point: replacement of a detrimental feature by a new and more harmonious one. So I think we achieve that in terms of removing or improving, removing the M&S store and improving Northgate House. Those enhancements. And then if you go down to 5th bullet point, introducing new views, including glimpses, better frame views that add to the public experience of the asset. So that relates to the point I was making about the new views from the podium, and indeed from the new buildings, which would add to the public experience of Brook House.
Okay.
And then in terms of the
could you refer to the point that I put to you, please, now?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of, I mean, I've recognised in my written evidence that the proposed towers would reduce the prominence of Brook House, but I don't consider that to be harmful because they're in the same architectural idiom. I think they respect the setting of Brook House. And I think indeed there are examples of listed clusters of listed buildings, and also examples of new buildings that have been constructed near to listed towers, new tall buildings that have been constructed near to listed towers. So if you go to page 68 of my appendices, I've included some examples there.
Yeah.
So you can see on page 68, that's at the Barbican, which is in the same architectural idiom as Brook House, with a podium and tower. And that was obviously constructed, you know, as a piece with a number of towers. We've also got the Balfron Tower there at figure 5.2. So that's listed and has a number of other tall buildings in close proximity to it, which appear to have been developed at the same time. If you go on to the next page, page 69, which I think is quite interesting, that's Metro Central Heights in Elephant and Castle. And basically there's a grade 2 listed building there, a tower block. And there's a recent consent for a 15-storey tower in the same city block, which is basically done in the same style, so it's difficult to identify which one it is. Then there's some other examples, figure 5.4, there's Alpha Tower in Birmingham, which is grade 2 listed, also in close proximity to other tall buildings. And then at figure 5.5, the CIS Tower in Manchester, also grade 2 listed, and is part of a tall building cluster. So certainly, and there's more on the following page as well. Figure 5.6, the Library and Arts Tower in the University of Sheffield, which is grade 2 star listed, also in close proximity to other tall buildings.
Okay, so what are the relevance of those examples to this appeal?
I suppose that there's nothing in the form of Brook House to preclude the construction of other tall buildings in close proximity. And indeed for the Barbican Centre, that was part of the original design concept. So it demonstrates that our design approach, which is with this podium and tower arrangement, respects the setting of Brook House and is entirely sort of acceptable. The other point I wanted to make while we're in my appendices is in fact that clusters of tall buildings can be attractive. They can be very beautiful. And if you look at page 72, page 78 and 79 of my appendices, there's some photographs of some clusters of tall buildings in London. So figure 5.9, we have Canary Wharf, which is a cluster of tall buildings, which you can see there from Greenwich Park. And there's the grade 1 listed Royal Naval College and Queen's House, which is part of a World Heritage Site, which is seen in this sort of dynamic composition with the cluster of tall buildings at Canary Wharf. And that's very attractive. And in my view, doesn't harm the setting of the World Heritage Site. And then also the next page on page 73, which shows the one of the London View Management Framework viewpoints from Waterloo Bridge, and you can see the cluster, the eastern cluster there, which I think is very attractive, and I note that it's seen in relationship with St Paul's Cathedral, which is grade 1 listed.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, could I ask you to comment on the what Miss Markham has said, particularly the relevance of other examples to this appeal?
Yep, no, okay, just take one sentence, if you may permit me, on the point before on the enhancements. All I'd say is they've obviously, again, got to be taken in the context of significance, those bullet points in GPA 3, of course. In terms of the other...
Sorry, okay.
Sorry.
No, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Is that all that people want to say on the enhancement? Because I don't want to go back to that document again. Okay, now let's continue, please, Mr. Murphy, on the point that I raised with you.
So each of these other developments, we obviously don't have setting assessments in front of us for each of the ones Ms. Markham just said, but just thinking about a few of them, as with all heritage assets, everything is bespoke to each one. So we think of the Barbican, yes, it's several towers, but it was designed as several towers, not as a single landmark building. Some of the buildings Ms. Markham mentioned weren't designed as landmark buildings necessarily. Some of the buildings Ms. Markham just described, such as the Canary Wharf one, was seen as hugely controversial, especially in views from Greenwich Park, which forms part of the London View Management Framework. So in terms of the examples Ms. Markham has just given, they have nothing to do with assessing the significance of Brook House and the impacts of this proposal, because as I've just said, the fact that they're tall buildings means that the attributes of significance that contribute to Brook House may not be the same attributes of significance that contribute to some of these, such as the Barbican, which wasn't designed as a singular tall building. And the only other thing I would add is that in 7.8 of my proof, I suppose I'm confused by the appellant's position that removing the townscape value isn't harmful, given, as I've outlined in my proof, I've quoted paragraph 4.56 and paragraph 5.16 from the appellant's own TVIA that says why Brook House is a tall landmark building. So to diminish this must be considered harmful. It's been well established in the TVIA that landmark status contributes to significance. It's established in the listing description, it's established in a Market Square decision, and it's established in my proof of evidence. And I don't even think there's any disagreement that the landmark situation of Brook House contributes to its significance. I suppose the disagreement here is, does a cluster of 4 tall buildings in that proximity diminish the landmark experience of Brook House? And I'd say absolutely it does. And I think that's all I need to say. And you'll experience, well, you have experienced, you will experience yourself from the walk around. And if you do walk around again, there is a model, helpfully, of the development just in the town square, which would be useful to see as well, I think, if you haven't already done.
In the shop window?
That's the one, yes. You can see, it gives a good impression of the scale and proximity of the developments of Brook House.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you for that. Ms. Markham, just on the point that...
Yes, I just wanted to respond to clarify that I do disagree that the landmark role contributes to the significance of Brook House, as I set out earlier. For the reasons that I set out earlier, I won't kind of go over that again. In my sort of last answer, I know that Mr. Murphy discussed the sort of implications of the Orwell appeal decision on our scheme. And I just wanted to go through my assessment of that as well, which is set out in my rebuttal, but I just wanted to have the opportunity to set it out orally as well. And basically my rebuttal at paragraphs 1.15.3 is, I'll sort of go from there. And the appeal decision says that the proposed development, that's talking about the Orwell scheme, would introduce a cluster of tall buildings in the setting of Brook House. So I agree that that also applies to the proposals, but I note that the consent has been granted for Orwell. So basically that's already happened, and Inspector Rose acknowledged that there would be a cluster of tall buildings in the setting of Brook House as a result of his consent. And then at my paragraph 1.15 to 4, I summarise the appeal decision, which says, in local views, these tall buildings would appear distinct in form and set well apart from Brook House. So that's at paragraph 104 of the appeal decision. And we spent a lot of time yesterday looking at the views, and I recognise there are some views where the proposals will appear as a sort of group and as a cluster with Brook House, but there are also a number of views where there's a considerable separation because of the 60-metre separation. My analysis is that the proposed buildings will appear distinct in form and in most cases set well apart from Brook House. And then at 1.15.5, I summarise the appeal inspector's decision where it says more widely the development would appear as an additional element on the skyline, lessening the focus of Brook House. And then he finds makes a finding of less than substantial harm as a result of that. So I think it really is to do with the distant views. Now, I disagree that would have a similar harmful effect as a result of the appeal scheme. If you look at the visualizations of the distant views, in the cumulative condition, we do show the Orwell scheme, and it had the stepped massing, which is of greater mass than our proposals, because we've got this podium and tower arrangement. The towers are sort of visually distinct and separate, and basically don't have a big an effect on Brook House. And in any regard, I don't think, because of the considerable distance, as I said earlier, I don't think you can appreciate the architectural quality of Brook House in those distant views. So I don't consider the effect on those distant views to be harmful. And then in addition to that, and I know that we've touched on the benefits already, the Orwell scheme, I don't think identified any benefits, any heritage benefits, whereas I've set out at length why I think there are heritage benefits. So I think that's why there's a distinction between our scheme and Orwell, and why I identify beneficial effects of Brook House and no harm.
Okay, Mr. Murphy.
Just two very quick points, Ma'am, if that's okay. One is just to go back to 7.8 of my proof, and I think we need to read those quotes I've got from the TVIA from Montague Evans, because since that TVIA was done, the Townscape hasn't changed. It would change these opinions from what I can see. So from Montague Evans' own TVIA that Ms. Markham reviewed, the tower is a feature unique to Basildon and was intended as some type of tall physical landmark for the new town to identify the town centre's location and counterbalance the surrounding low-rise shopping centre at 160 feet. It provided a visual focus for its scale and visibility. It helped the town centre to be recognisable for miles around. And then at 5.16, just the first sentence of that, again in the Montague Evans TVIA that Ms. Markham reviewed, Brook House is the landmark building at the heart of the town centre, highly visible from many neighbourhoods in Basildon. So the Townscape hasn't changed since Montague Evans did their TVIA. And then if we turn back to paragraph 104 of the Land at Market Square decision, the inspector says, this is of the Market Square development. In my opinion, in local views, these would appear distinct in form and character set well apart from Brook House. So the inspector makes note of how distinct that development will be, and I don't think we can attribute anything, and he still found harm. And so, as I've already discussed, and I won't repeat now, the proximity height of this proposal must therefore be more harmful than the harm that's
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't need to hear anything more on that. Could I, you also raised the point, Mr. Murphy, you speak about the form and appearance, and you said the four towers so close would obscure or diminish planned views within the town centre. Can you explain what you mean by planned views?
So I think you asked the question earlier about the orientation of Brook House, and as we can see, the orientation of Brook House permits views towards it on the core, the spine axis. So that would that relates to that aspect.
Okay, so
I think that was
yes,
designed as such. Yes.
Okay. Miss Markham, have you got anything to say on that?
Yes, I'm just on the commentary in the HGVIA. I was slightly struggling to follow the paragraph references, but I think we did go through this yesterday in my cross-examination.
We did, and
I think my position is clear, and I probably don't need to continue to clarify it. In terms of planned views, I mean, I think I don't think there's any evidence that was sort of designed or planned views, and in all the kind of research that I've done into Brook House, they weren't mentioned in any of the articles, and we've been through those articles at length.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, you also say that the tall residential towers are not within the original ethos of New Towns. Now, that is ground that we've covered, but is there anything else that you wish to say to that?
No, I don't think so. I think you've got the information in my proof of evidence on that. The quotes I've made.
Okay, so you're saying that they're not within the original ethos? So
sorry, Mum.
Yeah, no, go on.
So I think I've alluded to a couple of quotes where what you're referencing is my quotes where I've referenced that there was a need to grow a new town in the past, and typically in terms of residential units, and those residential units typically are the estates that I think Mr. Hancock helpfully described yesterday, and not at any point in any of those discussions was it discussed that height would be the answer. In fact, what they talk about is Greenbelt being on the periphery of the new town and expansion being problematic in that sense that you couldn't just carry on what you were doing. And at no point in any of these articles or these discussions did anyone turn around and say, well, we'll just do height instead. That was never considered as a solution, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, Miss Markham?
Yes, I strongly disagree with that. In terms of the historic research that I set out in my brief, there are lots of examples in the contemporary articles about them bemoaning the fact that it wasn't possible to have more height, that the economics were limiting the height. The architects wanted more height because it would add sort of architectural expression and focus. So I don't think it was desirable, the lack of height. It was just a sort of economic reality, and there's lots and lots of that in my proof. I mean, I can go through it all again, but
no, you don't need to.
You've heard it already.
Mr. Hancock?
Yes, just briefly on the point that Mr. Murphy just made and that Ms. Markham's responded to. So again, we don't need to go back into the 57 article, but within that, there you do see, as I said yesterday, the motivations for low rise. They are partially to do with why would we go tall? We've got space to burn, essentially, and they are also partially to do with what people want at the time. So there's a lot in there that says, well, why would you buy a flat when you could buy a house and a garden for the same amount? So I think we need to be very, very careful about that point, because I mean, we now have a situation where Basildon is a hugely expensive place to live comparatively, compared to sort of general incomes. It's a very general point, but times have changed and we now want to build denser, and in a way that 57 article in saying, well, there might be towers in the future is recognizing that point, and that shouldn't point us towards saying, well, they envisage tall buildings in the future, so it should be fine to build tall buildings wherever we want. But clearly we need to be very careful about how slavish we're being about 1957 design intent when we've got a town with its own present concerns and considerations. And like I said yesterday, I said in my conclusion of my proof, Brook House and its singularity, whatever that means, in my view, is a monument to the issue in front of you and the crisis that Basildon faces. That if we're saying that is the one place where height was acceptable and was intended, and that needs to be defended in perpetuity, then lots of Basildon's problems will continue in perpetuity. If we took the approach that Mr. Murphy's just taken to say that height was never intended in Basildon, then and that's important, and we need to defend that, say, then we would be looking at a lot of these other failed estates around the edges, and we wouldn't be promoting increased densification, 15-minute neighbourhoods, in order to solve some of the social issues that have arisen from those approaches. So I just issue a sort of note of caution on that, I think, from my point of view.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Murphy?
Thank you. I think Mr. Hancock's just provided a commentary on general planning, but drawing it back to significance of Brook House, there's 2 points I think we need to consider. Is one, that there was a talk of high-rise buildings in Basildon, and that was realised in the form of Brook House after 1957. And there is a common factor between the documents after that, between the ones Ms. Markham have quoted and the ones I have, in that further height is not mentioned anywhere specifically.
And
as was said yesterday, as was covered yesterday, I think, in the Townscape cross-examination.
Thank you. Ms. Markham, I don't want to labour this point because it's something that we have covered.
Yes, I suppose it's just to make the point that there are other tall buildings in Basildon after the date after Brook House, so it's not the only one, including Great Eggs House, which is, you know, in the same city block.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, you also refer to the permanence of the intervention. I don't think I don't need much help on that.
No, I don't think so, ma'am. Just on one thing, just on Ms. Markham's point, I just draw you, I won't read it out, but paragraph 42 of the inspector's appeal decision about Great Oaks and Acorn House completing a subordinate composition, and the status of Brook House remains clearly legible. I think it's just worth, when we're looking at other tall buildings in Basildon, I think it's worth looking at the inspector's decision. And on the permanence, of course, this is a permanent development, or designed to be, one would hope. And yeah, it's not a reversible development in that sense.
Okay. Does anybody wish to say anything more on the impacts of the proposed development? Ms. Markham?
Yes, I had a couple of other points just to respond to what Mr. Murphy just said in terms of Brook House being a subordinate composition. Obviously, with the Orwell consent, it won't be subordinate anymore. There'll be other tall buildings of equal height and slightly greater, and it will form a cluster. And then the only other point that I wanted to make on the impact of the proposed development, and I think it was touched on in your introduction, was to draw attention to the consultation responses. And just to note that Essex Place Services didn't recommend refusal of this application as they did on the cinema application, and that neither Historic England nor 20th Century Society have commented on the application or objected to it, whereas 20th Century Society had a strong objection to the cinema development, just to note that.
Okay, okay. Mr. Murphy?
We did identify harm of that other appeal scheme. The wording might not have been recommend refusal, but there was harm identified. It's just the difference in wording, essentially, between which Ms. Markham's suggesting. And then just on the other point Ms. Markham made first off, I don't need, I've quoted it 7 times, just paragraph 104 of the inspector's appeal decision about the kind of the retention of Brook House as a prominent landmark and so on.
Okay. Is there anything that anybody else wants to raise?
And I suppose the only point I would retort on that is in terms of the appeal decision, the sort of definition of preeminence is quite sort of precisely defined by the appeal inspector on Orwell in terms of its architectural form and the horizontality and the vertical expression. I think that's all preserved by the proposed development. And actually, there was one other point that I didn't cover in the rest. I've just realised that the our proposals would have no effect on the townscape arrangement that's defined in the list description.
Yeah, so all the relationship with the square and the,
exactly,
you know, all of that and the alignment. I've got all that. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, then. So can we just summarise then? I'll turn to the council first of all to explain your summary of where. I understand that you're saying that there's harm. I understand you're saying less than substantial harm. Where does it lie on that spectrum?
And I've concluded low to middle, so towards the middle of the scale, or middle of the scale we're looking at here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. Ms. Markham?
Well, in the ES, we've identified a major beneficial effect, Brook House. I mean, I don't know if you think it would be helpful. I could take you through the tables to sort of explain how we got to that conclusion, if you think that would be helpful.
Which the tables in the...
Yes, so should I take you through it? If you get the HTVIA, and then if you have, we've got page 53, provides the sort of commentary in, no, that's not right. Yes, no, it is 53, so I missed it. Page 53 has got the sort of text commentary sort of explaining our assessment, and basically my assessment has drawn on that and built upon that. And then we have on page 55, we've got a table which sort of summarises the kind of ES assessment. You know, that the heritage value of Brook House is medium, susceptibility to change is high, and that's because it's within the block. And then from that you get a sensitivity of moderate to high, and then we have a high magnitude of effect, and then in terms of the effect in the sort of operational phase, which you'll be most concerned about, it's major beneficial. And I think just to explain that, it's worth having a look at the definition of the tables in the methodology section. So if you go to page 12, and table 2.6, it's got the definition of what a high magnitude of effect is. So there's considerable change to the value of the receptor. Proposals are a new component ranging from a notable change in receptor characteristics over an extensive area to an intensive change over a more limited area. And the proposals would be very noticeable. Loss or major alteration to key elements, features, characteristics of the baseline. The duration of this may be permanent and non-reversible. So that's the magnitude. And then just to finish off with going to the following page, which is page 13, table 2.8. So the likely significant effect, a major beneficial is defined as the scheme would be in keeping with and would provide a major improvement to or reinforce the value of the receptor. And that's why we think there'll be a major, for all the reasons I've set out before, that's why I think there'll be a major beneficial effect to Brook House.
Okay. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise on this matter?
Nothing from me.
What I would suggest, therefore, I've already got a list of an itinerary for the site visit. I don't need that. What I usually do is ask the parties after a round table to sit together and do me a position statement of where we've got on the main issues that we covered, those main headings that we've covered here. Just if anything's changed, if anything has changed through the discussion that we've done today. Mr. Murphy's familiar with this, I think. Through other roundtables that I've done. If I set a deadline for that to come in on Monday, by the end of play on Monday, just setting out what we've spoken about, you can use the headings that are on there and just a couple of bullet points about what the positions are, just to help me in coming to my conclusions. Okay, it's now 1:45. Is everybody okay to have a 5-minute break and then come back and do the round table, section 106 round table? Yes, everyone's okay?
Yes.
Okay, I have to let my son in, who's been waiting outside now for about a quarter of an hour, having returned from college. So I'll just, if we just take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back. The inquiry's adjourned. until, if we say 10 to. Thank you. It's now 10 to 1 and this inquiry is resumed. We're now going to deal with the 106 agreement. Who's going to speak to this, please?
I am for the council, for the Borough Council. I'm Charlotte Mackay.
Lovely. Okay. Could I ask you to just walk me through the agreements? And I'm particularly interested in whether it meets the tests, whether the provisions meet the tests of necessity, whether they're directly related to the development and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind.
Can I just check that we've got the county council on the call? Yeah. So if we turn to the SIL compliance statement that was sent through, I think that might be the most helpful.
Yes, I've got that in front of me.
So the first obligation relates to the employment and skills contribution, and the details of that are set out on page 5 of the SIL compliance statement. So the requirement is a financial contribution of £30,000 per year for each year of construction of plot 1 and plot 2, and that's to be applied to pay for the employment and skills plan coordinator during the construction operational phases in relation to both plots 1 and plot 2, and towards any ongoing operational needs of the advice store and its delivery. And then how that meets the test is then set out on page 15.
Right, and what's the policy requirement there?
So the policy requirement is set out in policy E11 of the emerging local plan, which sees the improvements to skills levels and employment amongst local residents.
So is there any current policy requirement?
It's just within our emerging local plan, is that right? Yeah, it's just within the emerging local plan.
Right, okay. Okay.
Are you happy for me to move on to the RAMS? Yes,
I am. Sorry, I'm still with that. So how is that calculated, that financial contribution?
So the financial, sorry, I've just got Miss Lawrence sat next to me who calculated it.
Can you refer me to any document that shows the methodology for calculating that?
Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Do you want to come onto the camera and explain? Yeah, I think that'll be easier. Can we move the camera back slightly and I'll just get Mrs. Lawrence onto the camera. She's the case officer who will probably be more helpful in answering that question. Camera.
Good afternoon. The employment and skills contribution was provided to us by the employment and skills team at the council. I am not aware of the specific methodology for arriving at that calculation, but it was in discussion with that team.
Okay, I need to know how that's calculated in order to assess whether it's directly related to the development or not. Without that,
come back to you on that. Yeah.
Sorry?
We'll obviously investigate that during the course of the day. Can we provide a note to you during the course of the day on Monday on that? So
yeah,
have the inquiry resumed on Tuesday.
That's fine. That's going to be a general point as we go through, that I need to know if there's a financial contribution. I need to know how it's calculated. Where there's an emerging policy, I want a reason. I want some justification why that emerging policy comes into play now, the weight that you're attaching to that. in terms of where we're dealing with to assess whether it's fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind and directly related to the development, I need you to indicate to me where the money's going to be spent. So, you know, a physical project, say, for example, I mean, I'm just referring to the educational provision. I need to know where that money's going to be spent, and I need to know what project it's going to be spent on. Those are general points. But if you continue to go through, I'm happy to go through. So the next one is the Essex Coast RAMS contribution. Just to cut to the chase, I've looked at that. That's in accordance with the Essex Coast Recreation, Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy. I don't have any comment on that unless somebody else does. No. Okay, if you can go on to healthcare provision.
So the healthcare contribution is a financial contribution of £100,350, 20 pence for plot 1, and it is going to be, it arises through the need for additional primary healthcare capacity in the area, and the existing surgery is not having capacity, and it's required to mitigate the impact of the development on healthcare. And again, that's from our emerging policy HC1, and it's being calculated by the NHS using their accepted methodology, which is based on additional population growth arising from the development and the additional floor space required to meet that growth.
Okay, I understand that. Same thing arises here. A current policy, if you've got current policy, can you direct me towards that? If you're not directing me towards current policy, the emerging policy reason for that, etc. It's the same point.
Yeah.
Okay, if we move on to open space, culture, play and sports provision.
So the open space, culture, play and sports provision is 307,516 for plot 1, and that has been, again, it's an emerging policy HC2, so we'll pick that up in our note, and that's been calculated based on the draft IDP from 2019, and that's how that's been calculated. And then for plot 2, it would be calculated.
What status? Sorry, what has that been through consultation? That document and the draft document?
No, it is a draft IDP. It is not in the public domain, but we have shared it in confidence with the appellant.
It's not in the public domain. Okay, you need to expand. Sorry, you need to expand on that. That draft document and this, you know, where it has progressed towards adoption. Okay, and that sets out the way in which the contribution has been calculated.
Yeah.
Okay, and where will the money be spent?
And the contributions are to be spent. Let me just go to the draft, sorry.
Okay, if you can just put that in the table.
Put that in the notes, yeah.
It's just really helpful if you can just put that in the note. All these points that I'm raising, that the table format is really helpful if you can just include those points.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Or provide justification. So where will that be spent? The open space, culture, play and sports provision contribution. Okay, so now we move on to town centre highway improvements and pedestrian access contributions.
Yeah, and again, these are based on emerging policies, so we'll set that out in our note. And again, it's been calculated using the draft IDP, so we'll address that as well. And we will also need to address where it's going to be spent in our note, because it's not within that table.
Okay. And then the schedule 2 deals with private for sale unit, so that's marketing strategy, isn't it?
Yes.
To prioritise local people.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's set out. I think in more detail, it's set out on page 6 as well. So how it actually works in practice.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay.
And then schedule 3 moves on to the build to rent provisions.
And that's in accordance with government guidance.
Yes.
And the MPPF. Yeah. Okay, I don't have any comment on that.
And then we have viability reviews, early stage and late stage in relation to plot 1, and then late stage only in relation to plot 2. And any monies which come out of those reviews to be used towards affordable housing within the borough. And they're in accordance with SAVE policies and emerging policies, which is set up in the table on page 18. And they're standard review mechanisms as to how they're calculated, and the late stage reviews are carried out at 75% occupation of each plot.
Okay, and you've heard what I've said about emerging policy,
yes.
particularly the cap, which is in. Okay, so need justification for that. Okay, and the unit mix and accommodation schedule.
Yeah, so a unit mix has been, an indicative unit mix has already been submitted along with an alternative unit mix. The 106 requires a unit mix to be submitted at reserve matters stage for plot 2 and to be broadly in accordance with those 2 documents that have already been submitted and which are appended to the 106. And then the accommodation schedule is also to be submitted, covering the accommodation to be provided on plot 2 and also what is provided on plot 1.
Okay, give me a policy justification for that. There isn't one at the moment. Okay, and the highways and transport.
So in the list of draft conditions, there will be a condition around on-street car parking, and the £10,000 financial contribution seeks to monitor the performance of the on-street parking controls in the vicinity of the development. Okay,
again, how has that been calculated? I need to be assured that it's fairly and reasonably related.
Yeah, that's
so tell me how that's been calculated. The blue badge and drop-off parking spaces.
Yeah.
They fall outside the site. Okay. So sorry, it's the wording. They fall outside the red line and therefore should be secured by 106. Yes.
Yes, we can't condition them yet.
No, I understand. Okay. Yeah, and then now employment again.
Yeah. So this is an employment and skills plan. So this is a document which is submitted to the council, which details how things such as apprenticeships will be offered through the various phases of the development. Again, there's an emerging policy, so we will pick that up, but it's a plan to be submitted and then implemented.
Okay, so that plan will set out what needs to be done and where it needs to be done and by what time it needs to be done, presumably.
So the plan will set out what opportunities there will be in terms of employment and skills throughout the various phases, and then how that will be implemented using the what's the word I'm looking for? The officer who will be appointed to ensure compliance with the employment and skills plan.
Okay. Okay, the next thing we deal with is historic building recording. What does that relate to?
So there's condition 15 on the draft list of conditions allows the appellant to undertake the historic building recording themselves, but the 106 picks up in the event that they don't do that, that they will pay and we will then use Essex County Council in order to carry out that recording.
Okay, I suppose it'll come down to the necessity of the condition, really. And that's something I can pick up later, but okay. And then we move on to the quality review panel and the requirement for the plot 2 in particular to go through the QRP.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't have any comment on that. And then we move on to public realm. This is really dealing with the cut, isn't it? What we've referred to as the cut.
It is, but Mrs. Barker, I think, will be providing an updated draft because the public realm is also going to include the galleried. Is that how we refer to them? Galleried gardens. So it will be slightly broader than just the cut. But yes, it's to ensure that there's 24-hour access to those areas of public realm.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay, and then there's a monitoring fee.
Yeah.
Okay, how has that been calculated?
Deal with that in the note, can't we? Yeah.
Okay, you need to tell me how that's been calculated and why it comes into play.
Yeah.
Okay then, and Essex County Council obligations. The first one is the sustainable transport contribution.
So again, I believe we've got Mrs. Cook on the.
You want us to take up on the responses to those? Okay. Yes. Good afternoon. Highways and transport. I'm going to refer to my colleague Hilary. Hilary, can you come on and take the questions regarding the highway conditions, please?
Hello. Yes. I work for this strategic development team dealing with highway matters. The sustainable transport contribution has been calculated on a per dwelling basis, and on the basis of the rate identified in the IDP.
So that's the draft IDP.
That's right. Yes, the draft IDP.
So, is there a methodology in that draft IDP?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so you need to refer me to that. The methodology that you're using, you refer to cycle, pedestrian links, etc. You need to tell me where that money is going to be spent, because I need to come to a conclusion that it is related to the development.
Right. It is. It's there. There is a document called the LC WIP Plus, which was commissioned by Basildon Borough Council, and we, as an Essex County Council, have got we consulted on a draft LC WIP proposal, identifying various routes throughout the whole of the Basildon area, including the town centre, that identified a significant number of routes between the town centre and employment uses and the station and the hospital. There have been some allocation of the costs of the routes which are would be potentially used by residents of all the town centre sites, and that way the routes that would be used by those developments have been apportioned to all the town centre developments.
Okay, so you need to refer me to that. You need to refer me to that, so that one, where how you've calculated it, and two, where that money would be spent, so that I can assess it against those two tests. That right. It's directly related to development and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind.
I'm not sure if you have got the LC WIP documents. That's a Basildon document, but it can be provided for you.
Okay. What I would suggest, therefore, is that you provide the justification within this, and then we'll look if there is a document that you need to refer to, we can add it to the core documents list if that's appropriate.
Yes, fine.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay then, and let's move on to the education contributions. Let's go. The first one's dealing with school capacity.
Excuse me. We've moved on to Schedule 7. Are we looking at early years, or are we looking at education in general?
No, school capacity first of all, and then early years. So if we deal with school capacity first.
Okay, so we're looking at primary and secondary.
Yeah.
Okay, that the calculation is set out in our the Essex Developer Guide, which I believe as a as a core document.
Yeah, and that's referred to.
And it's also set out where that money is going to be spent. We have a 10-year plan which identifies where forecasted education requirements are, which do you need to see that as a core document?
Well, yeah, if you can put that in the justification, that would be helpful.
So you don't need the document itself, just the justification.
Sorry, I thought it was in the 10-year plan.
The 10-year, yes, the calculation where we come up with the figure for the contribution is set in the Essex Developer Guide, which has already been referred to, and the purpose of the spend is why we need the money, where we're going to use it, is set out in the 10-year plan, the Essex School Organisation Service 10-year plan.
Okay, and that's not before the inquiry, you're saying?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, if you are going to refer to it, it needs to be before the inquiry.
Okay.
So it needs to be a core document. So when this comes forward, when this is completed, if you do a list of those documents that you're looking to add to the core documents list, and I'll take a view on it.
Okay, thank you. So are you content with the other comments that are submitted in the CIL statement about the secondary and primary education?
Yeah, that's fine. So what you've done is you've referred me to the DFE annual school capacity return, and that new places are required. You've told me how that formula is used. What you need to do is say where it's going to be, where that capacity is going to be made, and you've already referred me to the 10-year plan.
So you need more detail. You need me to drill down.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then can we move on to early years, please?
Okay. The early years calculation, the financial contribution is. Candice, did you want to take? Well, I calculate the contribution request financially with consultation with our early years colleagues, and the calculation is the same as we use for the primary education calculation, which is quite Ofsted. The DFE scorecard gives you the costs for primary and secondary, but it recommends that you use the same cost for primary and apply that to early years. So
that's the formula being set out in the developer's guide that you've referred me to earlier. Okay.
Yes. The requirement for the facility, Candice, would you like to come and speak on that part?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you quite rightly mentioned, Anne, obviously the formula is published within the development guide and is generated based on the dwellings for flats with bedrooms, two rooms and above, and houses. And the unit mix for this particular development created or generated a need for 12 early years and childcare places.
Okay. So that's the application of the developer's guide. Okay, and where will those be provided?
So because of quite a few developments within the town centre, we looked particularly at the Market Square and this one together, and where a 30-place early years and childcare provision would be best suited. And when responding to the the request that was sent across, we put in a request for land for a 30-place early years and childcare provision and contributions towards those at that time.
Sorry, and where is that?
So in the original request, we had a discussion with Basildon about whether it would be best placed to place the 30-place facility within Market Square, or whether it would be Town Square, and it was decided from Basildon that Town Square would be best placed for this.
Okay, so you're telling that this is the issue that's been outstanding,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is the provision within the development, of an early years and childcare provision.
Yeah.
Yeah. How advanced are those discussions?
And did you want to update on those?
Yes, I'll come in on that discussion. We have been in close discussion with Karen and the appellate's team. We finalised our discussions yesterday, and I believe the changes are being made to the draft section 106 as we speak. Did you want me to outline what we have agreed?
Well, you might as well.
Okay. We, as a council, and as with the expertise from our colleagues, the marketing proposal from the appellant, and they are seeking an amount of rent for this facility. And from our experience, we don't feel that a provider can be found that would be able to afford that rent and have a sustainable facility operating. So we have discussed how they would take forward the requirement for an operator with our assistance. And should that not be successful, then we've included a fallback, so that if they cannot find an operator, then we have agreed a fee, set a contribution towards us, Essex County Council, fitting out another facility that would hopefully come forward in the area or in future developments.
Okay. Okay, have you got a site that you're looking at?
Not at this moment.
Okay, I'll think about that one. But what you're looking for principally is the site on Market Square or within.
That was what was requested in our consultation response, was a financial contribution and land for an early years facility. Okay,
can you put some more meat on the bones in terms of the justification there? That would be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, and can we move on to monitoring fee? Really what I want to know is how that's been calculated.
I will need to come back to you on that, and it's I believe it's set out in the development guide. I need to just double check and make sure that.
Okay. How you've calculated? What's that? Yes. What that is based on? What are you monitoring?
Yes.
Why is it necessary? And how you've calculated that?
We're monitoring. Yes. Okay. I do need to refer back to that, so I will submit that information when I've collated.
Okay then. And in terms of the timescale, sorry, I've lost my program. We're looking to conclude this discussion on the afternoon of Wednesday the 19th. Okay, so it needs to be submitted in good time. So can we say on Tuesday, 12 o'clock Tuesday, we'll have this justification so that I can look at it and review it before that discussion? Because we've had this discussion, I would have thought that discussion is going to be shorter than the discussion that we usually have. And we'll just be picking up on the points that are outstanding. Okay, is there anything else that we need to pick up on the 106? No, Mr. Hill?
Sorry, only I think to ask if you could reflect over the weekend on whether you would be prepared to allow us any leeway with execution after the close of the inquiry in relation to that overseas signatory, on the assumption, of course, that everything that is contained within the obligation is aired, cleared and finalised before the inquiry closes, simply that we have to get the document overseas and back again. And I think we will struggle to do that by next Thursday or Friday if we're going to come back to discuss some of these points on Wednesday.
Okay. The critical thing, as you know, is that it's an agreement, and that is, you know, in front of me, and I'm able to take a view on it. I'm not having anything, you know, nebulous.
I completely understand.
Okay, then. Yeah. Okay. And if I get, you know, it may be that we don't have to have a discussion on the 106 again if everything that I've asked for is there and in front of me on the Tuesday. So if we have that document by 12 o'clock on Tuesday. Thank you very much, everybody. Is there anything else that we need to raise?
Ma'am, I think the only thing for next week is whether you were intending to produce an agenda for the 5-year housing land supply roundtable session, perhaps in the early part of next week, so we can all be organised for that on Tuesday morning. Yeah, that'll be on Monday. Either later this afternoon or Monday, looking more like Monday. And sorry, on that point, the position statement on the Heritage Roundtable, if the quicker that's done, the better. So giving Mr. Murphy, Hancock and Ms. Markham adequate time. If we say that comes in at 12 o'clock on Monday. I did say Monday, but if I say 12 p.m. Monday, then it gives them a bit of time. Thank you. Anything that anybody else wishes to raise? Thank you very much. It's now 20 past 1, a bit of a long morning session, but we don't have any afternoon session. So enjoy the afternoon, and we'll be back together on Tuesday at 9:30. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.